The story begins with a large white car speeding past the protagonist at breakneck speed. Then the guy held out his hand. He wanted to hold on so he wouldn't fall. Something whistled close by. The guy couldn't stand. He was starting to fall. The guy with red hair looked closely and silently at what was going on. The glasses guy's opponent was standing nearby. He was glaring at him viciously. Suddenly, something seemed to fly past the guy really fast and caught him. The boy found the last of his strength and threw himself desperately against his opponent. Suddenly, something flashed very brightly from the side. The main character was very surprised and frightened. The guy with red hair was also very frightened and surprised. He looked away cautiously. The car door opened and a very bright white light appeared from there. The protagonist looked at the car with a look of despair. He realized there was nothing he could do. The protagonist found himself in a dark and dank room with little light from the windows. The squalid room was illuminated only by dim daylight bulbs. Because of the dampness, water from the ceiling dripped directly onto the table in front of the protagonist. The guy sat absolutely silent in the surrounding silence. Only drops of water clattered on the table. The interlocutor told the guy in a calm voice that he was interested in his ability. The man on the other side of the long table asked the guy to tell him. Man asked the guy to tell me what really happened then. The protagonist was in his school building. He was wandering the halls. Suddenly, the boy Kim Do-yeon heard someone calling his name from behind. A schoolboy with red hair told a cheerful boy that he had come for his soul. The boy called his friend by someone's name. The guy told the main character that his math teacher was waiting for him and had a bunch of errands for him. Do-yeon was displeased. He reminded her that he was already collecting questionnaires for the math teacher. After that, the main character suggested to his friend that he take over for him. The guy said he declined. At the time, the school math teacher was sitting in his office talking on the phone. The protagonist with the worksheets walked to the entrance of the classroom. He waited for the teacher to finish speaking. Deciding not to wait any longer, Do-yeon went to the teacher and said he had brought the questionnaires. The teacher was still on the phone. The teacher apologized to the phone caller and said he had a visitor. After that, the teacher hung up the phone and turned around unhappily to the protagonist. The teacher told the kid sternly that he was tardy and late by a full 5 minutes. The student handed the teacher the papers and said that he had brought the questionnaires as requested. The teacher grudgingly told the guy that he should have been quicker. The teacher added that he was forever helping the guy with his duties. Do-yeon said humbly and calmly to the teacher that he completely agreed. The boy, standing near the teacher's desk, looked away, something he was very interested in. Do-yeon saw an interesting document on the table. At the same time, the master told someone on the phone that a student had dropped by. Looking closer, the student realized that he had a sheet of exam preparation questions in front of him. Do-yeon didn't take his eyes off the question paper. He decided to carefully snatch it away. The teacher, tired from work, stretched. He thought to himself why he had so much to do. Teacher remembered that he had almost forgotten about the questionnaire the student had brought him. The teacher took the pieces of paper with the questionnaires in his hands and flipped through them carefully. And then the teacher looked at a neighboring table. He was very excited. The teacher realized that the question paper was missing. He thought to himself that he would have to type it out again. The protagonist sat and scrutinized the answer sheet he had received. Do-yeon thought to himself wistfully, the teacher must have had the original document on his computer. After that, the student looked at the document and decided he didn't care much about any of this. Then the protagonist, looking at the answer sheet, decided to activate his special thinking abilities. The guy saw the secretary walk up to the teacher and call him Mr. John. She asked, "What is he doing?" Teacher Yang said he wants to print out the questions for the kids, even though he knows it's not necessary. Then the teacher slyly said that the actual exam would only have a couple of questions from the list. The protagonist continued to stare thoughtfully at the sheet of exam questions. Do-yeon realized that he had figured out the math teacher's plans. He decided to look at the answer sheet and throw it away. The guy decided to throw it away before someone else saw it. The door suddenly opened. The cheerful sister of the protagonist ran into the room. The sister ran up to her brother and asked with interest, "What kind of mischief is he up to here?" Do-yeon replied grudgingly for the girl to move away. The disgruntled girl asked her brother how on earth he could resist her charms. Brother called his sister by name Kim Do-hai and told her to get out of his room. Suddenly the sister noticed some paper on the table and shoved her brother aside to take a look. The girl asked the guy in surprise, where could he have gotten the exam questions from? Do-yeon shouted for his sister to give him back the paper. After that, the girl looked at the protagonist with a sly expression. After thinking for a bit, the sister asked her brother, did he really steal the answer paper? Do-yeon asked his sister what made her think he had stolen the document. The girl said cheerfully that it was up to him to share such valuable information. The sister said slyly that if she got that information from her brother, she would use it. The protagonist asked his sister angrily if she understood what it said. After this answer, The girl grabbed the guy by the hair on his head. Angry, the guy reminded his sister to take out the garbage. The girl asked with interest at the Duyun if he was changing the topic of conversation to get away from her. The brother suggested to his sister that she go and return the questions on the sheet to the teacher. She could also take out the trash on the way. The girl was still holding the guy by the hair. The sister was thinking about brother Duyun's proposal. She decided to go and take out the garbage after all. The girl irritably asked her brother, "Where's the trash?" Duyun replied that the trash is at the doorstep. After that, the girl turned around and walked out the door, slamming the door loudly behind her. Suddenly, the door opened and the sister asked angrily at her brother if he remembered that it was his turn to wash the dishes today. Duyun shouted to the girl to clean up. The protagonist moved into the kitchen after his sister left and did the dishes completely. It had been a long time since my sister had left, and the clock read 10 o'clock. The protagonist was sitting on the couch waiting for his sister to return, and the time had already reached 11 o'clock. Duyun began to worry. He couldn't figure out where his sister was. The boy waited for his sister to come. She still hadn't returned. It was past midnight and the clock showed almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Duyun tried not to worry, but the time had reached 2 o'clock in the morning and his sister still hadn't returned. The protagonist began to lose patience. He realized he had to go looking for his sister. It was raining outside. A guy with an umbrella. He was running down the street and calling his sister Kim Do-hee. The main character was walking through deserted streets. There was no one there and only rain was falling. The main character walked the streets between the houses in the rain. They were completely deserted. After that, Duyun started to go to public places. There were no people anywhere in the neighborhood. The protagonist thought to himself that his sister might have gone to school to return the sheet. After that, the guy came to the high school building. It was dark and there were no people around. Duyong stood alone in the rain with his umbrella. He thought to himself sadly that there was no one here. Suddenly something caught the protagonist's attention. He looked carefully to the side. The guy saw someone's sneaker lying on the road, very similar to the one his sister wore. Duyun looked carefully at the sneaker lying on the ground and decided to approach it. The brother wondered why his sister's sneaker was lying on the ground at this very spot outside the school. Without thinking long, the guy ran down the stairs and over to the sneaker lying on the ground. The protagonist reached out his hand to the sneaker lying there, and gradually some memories emerged in his mind. Duyun began to see the moment his sister was kidnapped, and how she tried to fight off her attackers. The protagonist took the sneaker in his hand. He realized that his worst expectations had come true. Duyun stood with a surprised and dumbfounded look. He tried to understand what had happened. The student was still looking at his daughter's sneaker and trying to figure out what was here. The boy's memory again conjured up vague images of his frightened sister. The protagonist was frightfully convinced that the girl had been kidnapped. Quite suddenly, someone from behind approached the protagonist and put his hand on his shoulder. Duyun was startled and surprised, and dropped his umbrella, which fell to the ground. Duyun turned around apprehensively to see who had just approached him. The main character saw a high school kid in basketball sneakers standing across from him. The unfamiliar guy was holding an umbrella and looking at the protagonist with attention. After a short pause, the guy who approached greeted Duyun in a friendly manner. Then the protagonist calmed down and greeted his comrade. The guy who came over was named Lee Yu-sun. He was a classmate of the protagonist. Lee Yu-sun's boyfriend told the main character that he's been watching him for a long time. Lee Yu-sun told a very surprised classmate that he had a very unusual ability. Afterward, did Yu-sun tell the main character that he was in trouble and asked if he needed help? At the same time, someone was discreetly watching Duyun and his classmate talking through binoculars. An unfamiliar man with binoculars followed the protagonist in detail. Standing not far away, the man thought happily to himself that he had found who he wanted. After that, the man decided excitedly that he would take on the main character right away. The protagonist, accompanied by his friend, was walking through the corridors of the school. Lee Yu-sun walked in front. The protagonist followed him. There was complete silence, and only the footsteps of the school children could be heard. The protagonist silently wondered to himself, where could they be going for so long? Duyun thought that he had never realized that there were offices in the school basement before. He also realized that he knew very little about his friend who was walking in front of him. Lee Yu-sun opened the door to the room and told the main character excitedly that they had come. Afterward, the guy told some man in the middle of the room that he had finally brought the main character. The man froze. He was still looking at the information on his smartphone. The man turned around and told the guys that they were on time. Duyun couldn't understand what kind of man was standing in front of him now. After that, the guy Lee Yu said that there was a detective named Han Ki-jun standing in front of her. The main character couldn't understand where the detective was coming from. The detective said cheerfully that he was on his way home. He motioned for the protagonist to sit down. The surprised protagonist thanked the detective and extended his hand. The detective and the schoolboy shook hands, and the man invited the young man to talk to him. Afterwards, the protagonist told the detective in great detail about his sister's disappearance. The man listened attentively. Do-yun said with interest to the detective sitting across from him. He did not look surprised. The main character said very excitedly that he had come to the right place. The schoolboy looked questioningly at the detective and asked if he could find his sister. The detective said there was nothing unusual about the girl's abduction. He also added that the boy was lucky that his sister was not killed on the spot. After a short pause, the detective said they would try to find out the sister's fate. The man looked at the main character and demanded that he agree to help them with his special ability. The protagonist thought about it. He decided to analyze his memory before answering the detective. A vision surfaced in Do-yun's mind where someone was very insistent on him to tell everything he had seen with his abilities. The protagonist thought about it and realized that not the most pleasant memories had surfaced in his mind. After thinking for a bit, Do-yun told the sitting detective that he was refusing his offer. The protagonist pushed back his chair and stood up. He said he had something to do. Do-yun told the detective that he came here to get help, not to offer his own. After the protagonist left, the room became silent. The detective then told the guy to keep an eye on the protagonist. The next day at school, the math teacher was called into the office. The protagonist arrived at the educator's office and asked if he had been summoned. The teacher cheerfully greeted the protagonist and asked how he was doing. The teacher said that he had heard about the girl's kidnapping before he also added that he had contacted people who could help in the search. The protagonist told the teacher what he would do after all. He thought to himself, didn't the teacher notice the missing questions? The teacher smiled at the boy, saying that he would find his sister soon. He also added that Do-yun should return to class. The main character didn't leave the classroom. He decided to approach the teacher with a question. The teacher, without turning around, asked the student what else he wanted to ask. Do-yun reminded the teacher that he promised to hand out questions to prepare for the exam. He added that they are all looking forward to it. The teacher told the boy that he hadn't finished the questions yet and wouldn't do them right away. Do-yun thanked the teacher. The schoolboy wondered how it could be that the teacher hadn't finished the questions. Then what did Do-yun see on the sheet yesterday? The main character realized that something was wrong. At that time, a guy ran up to him and asked him cheerfully what he was thinking about. Do-yun was unhappy about the appearance of a classmate. Lee-yu asked the boy in surprise, why was he so twisted? The main character wanted to get rid of an annoying classmate. He asked when did they become best friends. Lee-yu replied cheerfully to the main character that it's never too late to make friends. He also added that the police won't find Do-yun's sister, but they will be able to help him. The protagonist asked with annoyance why he was so sure of the helplessness of the police. He also added that he had already filed a report. Lee-yu was worried about such words. He told the protagonist that he didn't pull the cat by the tail. Afterward, Lee-yu asked the protagonist with great impatience whether the police believed him. The protagonist explained that he simply told the police that his sister was missing. Do-yun and his classmate noticed some schoolgirls walking past them, and they were talking about how the math teacher was strange today. The protagonist became alert. He remembered that he too had seen the unusual behavior of the math teacher. One of the pupils recalled that the teacher could not remember the names of the pupils, and then suddenly called everyone by name. Another student said that the math teacher forgot to check her homework. The main character was walking down the corridor with his classmate. He heard one of the girls say that the mathematician didn't look like himself. Lee-yu's boyfriend noticed that the protagonist was following the schoolgirls. Afterwards, Lee-yu asked Do-yun, did he really fall in love with one of the girls? After the class ended, the students left the classroom. The protagonist remained seated at his desk. Do-yun heard his classmates decided to go to the store instead of the canteen. The protagonist was completely absorbed in thinking about his missing sister. He took notes in a notebook. Do-yun looked at his notes and wondered what really happened to his sister. Did she run away or was she kidnapped? The kid thought the school surveillance camera was no help to him. Sister's missing looks like a runaway. Do-yun was most worried about the sneaker he found. It could prove the girl's kidnapping. The protagonist thought about it and decided that maybe it wasn't all just a kidnapping. Suddenly, a crumpled piece of paper landed on the main character's desk. Do-yun was distracted from his musings. He stared intently at the ball of paper that had arrived. The guy unfolded a crumpled piece of paper and noticed some number on it. After reading the note with the number on it, the guy thought it was definitely written by Lee-yu Sun. The protagonist looked sideways at his classmate Lee-yu Sun. At this time, the guy Lee-yu Sun gestured to the main character to text him his number. The protagonist looked at his classmate with distaste. The door to the school classroom opened and a girl walked in. She asked if there was a Kim Do-yun in the class. The main character stood up from his desk and waved to the girl. He confirmed that he was here. The girl told the protagonist that his math teacher was waiting for him urgently near the school entrance. After that, the main character went to the girl and asked her something. After chatting with the girl, Do-Yun quickly rushed outside where his teacher was waiting. The classmates could not understand what was going on and where the main character was breaking. The main character ran outside. He was looking for his teacher near the school entrance. Right after that, the protagonist saw the teacher standing there and called out to him. The math teacher turned around and greeted the schoolboy cheerfully with a smile. Do-Yun was tired from running. After a little breathing, he asked the teacher if it was true. The protagonist asked the teacher if his sister had been found. The teacher said they had. The teacher then opened the door to the car and told the boy they would talk in the car. The protagonist and his teacher were driving in a car on a street in a big city. The trip took place in complete silence. The duo did not know where they were going now together with the teacher. The protagonist stared out the window the whole trip. He was waiting for the teacher to start talking. After a long pause, Du-Ying turned to the teacher and looked at him carefully. The teacher drove the car as if nothing had happened and was not distracted by anything. After waiting a bit, the boy asked the teacher where he got that information from. The teacher said he knew someone in the police force. It was this acquaintance who said that someone had given information about the kidnapped sister. Afterward, the teacher said he was the only adult anyone could contact. Du-Yun thought that his sister often pissed the hell out of him, but he really didn't want her to get into trouble. The guy thought to himself sadly that he had no one but his sister. The protagonist thought to himself about the words he had heard from the teacher. Suddenly, the guy realized he never claimed his sister was kidnapped. After calming down a bit, the schoolboy turned to the math teacher with a question. Du-Yun asked the teacher very cautiously, "Is Tot feeling well?" The man was calmly driving the car. The schoolboy once again asked the teacher if anything was wrong. The teacher asked with interest to the guy, "Does the guy really want anything to happen to him?" The protagonist told the teacher calmly that he had a bad premonition. Du-Yun, holding his phone in his hands, told the teacher that he missed checking his homework at school. The teacher calmly replied that he had simply forgotten himself because of preparing questions for the exam. The main character told the teacher that there was another very big weirdness. The student told the teacher with interest that the teacher had never called him by his first name before. The protagonist filled the teacher in on calling him exceptionally lazy. The teacher listened to the words from the student absolutely calmly and remained silent. After that, the teacher asked in a calm voice, what was the meaning of everything Du-Yun had just told him? The boy looked at the teacher with great attention. He realized that the teacher knew something. Du-Yun said quietly to the teacher that he was suspicious. The teacher sat silent and looked at the road in front of him. Suddenly, the teacher turned around and looked sharply at the protagonist. At this time, the car was thrown aside. The teacher started to turn the steering wheel sharply in different directions. The car started to toss back and forth on the road. The car was going full speed and skidding around. The main character couldn't stay in his chair. He was tossed back and forth. An excited and frightened guy asked the driver what he was doing now. Suddenly, the pedagogue sitting behind the wheel reached out his hand to grab the protagonist. Du-Yun was very surprised and frightened when he noticed that the teacher's arm was so long that it was able to reach him. The main character felt he was having a hard time breathing. He started coughing. The teacher calmly asked the boy, "Didn't he ever notice that?" The teacher slyly asked the lad, "Did someone tip him off and where did the suspicion come from?" The main character couldn't fight off the teacher's hand. He yelled at the teacher to let him go. Du-Yun angrily shouted to the teacher, who continued to choke him with his hand, that they were all in on it. Then the protagonist angrily asked the teacher what he had done. Du-Ying shouted loudly at the educator, "What did he do to his sister before he—" The teacher turned around and told the guy with feigned surprise that he was very loud. At the same time, the protagonist was already completely engulfed by the teacher's hand and could not speak. The educator stepped on the gas and told the kid to shut up and follow him. The protagonist realized that he had to try to escape as soon as possible. He took his cell phone out of his pocket. The protagonist couldn't say a word. He held the phone in his hand and tried to turn it on. Du-Yun picked up the phone and started to try dialing the number on the scoreboard with his finger. The main character was able to dial the number of his friend named Lee Yu-sun, after which the protagonist frantically pressed the call button to his friend, at which time the teacher looked closely at the protagonist and suspected something. Du-Yun turned on the button on his phone to activate the call. The educator sternly asked the boy what he was doing, at which time the protagonist dropped his phone down. He still managed to call his friend. Du-Ying sat up and couldn't move. He saw the phone lying on the floor next to the chair. A phone call came from a friend of the protagonist who was at school at the time. Lin Yu boy was sitting in class at the time. He was dozing off, surrounded by his classmates. Something suddenly disturbed a schoolboy resting on his desk. The Ling Yu guy felt his smartphone in his pocket begin to ring and vibrate. The schoolboy marveled at the unexpected call that had disturbed him. The noise from the phone also attracted the attention of the teacher, and the rest of the school. Ling Yue grabbed his phone. He couldn't figure out who was calling him in the middle of class. Afterward, the schoolboy Ling Yu picked up the phone and asked quietly, "Is he really being called by you, son?" The protagonist, sitting in his car, heard his friend pick up the phone. The protagonist had no chance to speak because his mouth was clamped by the teacher's hand. After making a small attempt to free himself, Du Yun shouted with all his might for help. The teacher looked at the student and shouted menacingly at him that he was an idiot. Suddenly there was a crack of glass in the car as if something had hit it. The protagonist was very much surprised. At this time, the teacher loosened his grip on his hand. A Ling Yu boy appeared from somewhere. He grinningly shouted to the teacher that he had a cool seatbelt. After that, Ling Yu said cheerfully to the teacher that in case of an accident, he would definitely survive. At that time, Ling Yu was riding on the front window of the car. The teacher was very surprised by the appearance of the schoolboy. Ling Yu smiled with surprise at the teacher and asked him to show his documents. At this time in the classroom, the teacher walked over to the desk where Ling Yu was sitting and looked at her in surprise. The desk where Ling Yu had been sitting a short time ago was empty. Only his textbook and his smartphone were left. The teacher was surprised to ask where the boy had gone. She noticed that a call was activated on the phone for the boy. At this time, the protagonist and his teacher were still speeding through the city in a car. Ling Yu's boyfriend was able to stay on the hood of the speeding car without any trouble. Tapping on the windshield, Ling Yu repeated to the teacher that he had a good seatbelt. The teacher was very surprised to see the schoolboy. He didn't expect anyone to interrupt him. Du Yun was also startled by the appearance of his classmate. He realized that his phone call had reached him after all. A little coming to his senses, the pedagogue angrily asked the lad who he was. Ling Yu, still smiling cheerfully, asked the teacher, how could he forget one of his best students? Ling Yu boy was staring through the windshield at the teacher with burning eyes. The teacher tried to grab him with his hand, breaking through the glass. In the end, Ling Yu was able to successfully deflect to the side from the hand that flew past him. The main character got very excited. He realized that now classmate Ling Yu would try to help him escape. Ling Yu appeared in the windshield again. He asked the teacher with interest, is he not in the mood for conversation? After that, the teacher tried his hand again and grabbed the student with the car. The student was able to dodge. The teacher was very angry. He realized that he couldn't just get rid of Ling Yu. The teacher tried to grab the guy by the windshield, but couldn't do it because the guy was gone. The teacher irritatedly thought to himself that the disciple Ling Yu disappeared somewhere very abruptly. At the same time in the school, the students and the teacher were standing near the desk where Lin Yu had been sitting earlier. The teacher realized he couldn't to be seen. He shifted the gear lever to a higher speed, and then the teacher pressed the gas pedal to make a quick getaway car. The teacher was already annoyed, thinking that he should get out of here as soon as possible. Du Yun thought fearfully that he couldn't get out of the car now. He didn't have much help from Li Yu-sun. The protagonist didn't know what to do now. He noticed something flashing in the rearview mirror. At the same time, the Ling Yu guy jumped onto a speeding car from a great height. The educator became agitated when he heard a heavy thump on the roof of the car. The math teacher looked excitedly at the roof of the car from inside. Ling Yu shouted loudly to the main character to hurry up and take his eyes off. Du Yun was pleased. After that, Ling Yu loudly shouted at the main character to get out of the car as soon as possible. Du Yun was able to successfully unbuckle his seatbelt. He would now be able to escape. The main character grabbed the door. He thought he was going to jump out of the car. Then the protagonist tried the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. The teacher noticed the protagonist trying to get free. He decided to hold the guy back. The educator then pressed the gear shift lever to slow the car down. The teacher pressed the brake pedal sharply. The car started to brake sharply. Sudden braking caused the car to skid sideways on the road. The main character was scared. He realized he couldn't hold on because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. In the end, due to sudden braking, the protagonist flew into the front window at full speed. Because of the sudden braking, the Ling Yu guy couldn't hold on to the car. Lin Yu realized that he wouldn't be able to stay on the stalled vehicle so easily. In order to soar upwards as quickly as possible, the Ling Yu guy pushed off the hood of the car with his hand. After he pushed off, the guy flew high up above the car. Ling Yu, after flying, was able to successfully land on the ground in front of the car. Ling Yu guy realized that there was no way to waste time. He knew that the protagonist was in danger in the car. Lin Yu accelerated and ran up to the windshield of the car at full speed. The front window of the car was smashed and shattered due to the powerful impact. The Ling Yu boy ran up and tried to squash the teacher who was sitting in front with his hand. Ling Yu told the educator with great surprise that he had never seen such a feature. After gathering his strength, the teacher angrily told the guy that he didn't know why he wanted the guy. Ling Yu was pleased to tell the educator that the educator was now in the role of victim. At the same time, the protagonist began to come to his senses after being hit hard. Waking up, Do-yun thought to himself, what just happened now? After that, Ling Yue shouted to the teacher that it was time to end it before anyone came. Afterwards, the guy asked the educator where the real math teacher and the main character's sister went. The teacher whispered in a strange voice that it was all the king's will, after which the teacher uttered in a weakening voice about the disturbed balance. Then, an incomprehensible and mysterious cracking sound was heard. Ling Yu became a little worried. Ling Yu looked anxiously at the already almost completely exhausted teacher in front of him. Ling Yu shouted formidably and excitedly to the main character that it was time to run away. Do-yun and his classmate ran aside. The boy saw a bright white light shining inside the car. With a shocked look, the protagonist noticed the lights in the car getting brighter and brighter. At that time, there was a huge explosion. The car was blown apart. Ling Yu flew upwards with the main character. At this time in the classroom, the students were standing around and talking muffled amongst themselves. After landing, Do-yun along with his friend Ling Yu took a breath and walked slowly into themselves. The boy looked in the direction of the car he had driven with the teacher to this place. The protagonist saw the car burn to the ground and nothing left of it. Ling Yu collapsed on the ground from exhaustion. He shouted that it was very cruel. While a detective in a police car was speeding through town, suddenly the detective stopped the car and jumped out of it. After standing for a bit, the detective said grudgingly, he asked without further ado, after which the detective turned around unhappily and looked at the burned-out car. The police detective's car was parked in the middle of the street next to a burned-out car. Then the detective walked over to the burned-out car and began to examine it very carefully from every angle. Eventually, the detective wanted to make sure there was no one under the car. He walked over and kicked the wreckage of the car with his foot. Suddenly, something really surprised the detective, and he just froze in place. The main character and his high school friend Lin Yu were sitting on the porch outside the building. At that time, a detective approached. He asked the protagonist how he was doing. Do-yun replied that he was fine. After that, the guy asked the detective to get him some water. The detective said he would. The protagonist wrapped his arms around his head. He felt completely exhausted. The guy's been through a lot. He couldn't just put his head together. He didn't even know where to start asking the detective, at which time the boy's musings were interrupted by a detective. He came up and called him by name. The protagonist took his mind off his troubled thoughts and looked at the detective. The detective apologized to the guy because of what he had to experience. He also added that they did not expect someone to target the protagonist. Do-yun calmly replied to the detective that such a thing could not have been foreseen. After a short pause, the guy crossed his arms and asked the detective, "May I approach him with a question?" The detective looked cheerfully at the boy and said he could go to him. The main character recalled the burned-out car and said sadly that strange things happen. Do-yun asked with interest to the detective, "Does all this have to do with his sister's kidnapping and the math teacher?" The detective stuck his hand in his pocket and told the protagonist he had to see for himself. The detective held something out to the guy. He added that the guy would rather see than hear anything from him. The guy saw the detective holding a wallet. The man said it belonged to his teacher and offered to take a look. The protagonist reached out his hand and took his former teacher's wallet. The guy saw subconsciously what had happened to the teacher, and it was as if some monster had grabbed and possessed him. The protagonist was amazed at what he saw. He realized that today he was riding with an incomprehensible creature and not his teacher. The protagonist looked at the detective. He didn't know what to say. He was dumbfounded by what he saw. The detective asked the boy very calmly, did he see something unusual? The detective then took the teacher's wallet from the protagonist's hands. The detective said calmly, Do-yun saw two exactly the same people in his visions. The protagonist wondered very much how the man could have guessed what he saw. The detective calmly said that he had seen a similar phenomenon very many times before. The detective said it wasn't normal. A Ling Yu guy came up from behind with a bottle in his hands. The detective then confirmed that the protagonist's teacher is connected to those who kidnapped his sister. After that, the Ling Yu guy handed the detective the bottle. He calmly took it in his hands and unscrewed the cap, a bottle floating in the air above the detective's hand. He told the protagonist that he wasn't the only one who was gifted. Then the detective swirled the bottle and said that was all the information for now. The main character sat there and didn't say anything. The detective asked the guy, isn't there something he's curious about? The detective asked Do-yun if he wondered how he got the ability to dive into memories. Suddenly, the Ling Yu guy was very surprised to hear such words from the detective. The detective stopped talking. He noticed that the protagonist was looking at him with a piercing gaze. The detective, looking at the protagonist, said he was now curious. Do-yun was embarrassed and said in a shy voice that he must have burned himself. The detective was having a lot of fun. He laughed at the protagonist's reaction. The protagonist told the detective that he was okay with it, and he would help him. Do-jun asked a man to answer all his questions in return. Detective opened a bottle of water and told the protagonist he agreed. Afterward, the man smiled at the boy and thanked him for his help. Do-yun brought the bottle to his mouth and thanked the detective for his consent. Ling-yu boy thought with chagrin that the protagonist and the detective were not looking around at all. The flying bottle was noticed by bystanders standing off to the side. At the same time, the protagonist's sister was being imprisoned. She kept running her hand into the wall to get out. The girl banged on the wall with all her might and demanded to be let out of here. The sister was in a huge room in a glass chamber. She was banging on the wall and demanding to be let out. A couple of research assistants came into the room. They asked the guy next to the console, "What is the girl's condition?" The worker next to the console said the girl is healthy and adapts to the environment very quickly. The scientist added that the girl was very noisy and uncontrollable. The guy asked the visiting scientists if they still had to keep the girl. He added that she has no powers. The scientist with the glasses told the guy sternly that's why they needed a girl. The scientist explained that the sister's mediocrity was the reason she was suitable for the experiments. The scientist said they only needed a second child. The girl scientist with red hair said it had been 3 days since the mission had started. They got a signal that their man had used the death capsule. That meant he had failed. The scientist got very angry. He slammed his hand down on the console with all his might. The scientist realized that it was time to act immediately. He even gritted his teeth in anger. Then the scholar said threateningly that what he needed now was the brother of the girl they had. He demanded that Do-yun be brought in. The doors of the classroom opened and a teacher walked in. There were students in the room. Then the teacher asked everyone to be quiet. He wanted to say something important. The teacher said that although everyone was surprised that he walked in during class, he had an important announcement to make. The man said that math teacher Mr. Jun died yesterday in a car accident. The students were surprised. The teacher added that the students would study math on their own today. He also added that there would be an exam tomorrow. Students were outraged because they hadn't even been given the questions yet. The man added that students with complaints could go to the clerk's office. He once again said that there would be an exam tomorrow. The man added that at the end of the lesson, the class duty officers would come and Sammy would arrange the desks for the exam. The main character and his friend stayed after school to clean up. Do-yun walked around the classroom and moved desks and chairs for tomorrow's exam. Suddenly, a schoolgirl approached. She was carrying a dustpan. A schoolgirl with a dustpan looked at the protagonist and asked if he needed help. The protagonist looked at the girl with surprise and said he wouldn't refuse to help. After that, Do-yun started talking to the girl for a long time. Ling-yu watched them from the side. Lin-yu, standing with a broom, looked long and patiently at the protagonist with the schoolgirl. Time went very fast at school and very soon the clock showed 5 o'clock. The protagonist suddenly came to his senses and said excitedly that he had to go to the institute. The schoolgirl said to the main character that they'll finish cleaning up with Lin-yu's son themselves. The main character walked towards the exit. He thanked the girl and wished her good luck for the exam tomorrow. The schoolgirl waved goodbye to the guy and said she mutually wished him good luck. After the main character left, the girl said that he wished her good luck. The Ling-yu guy replied that he didn't even notice it. The girl got excited. She started twisting around in different directions and asking the guy if she could see like this. Ling-yu told the schoolgirl that he meant something else. He added that the main character is a dumbass. The next day, an exam was held in the school premises. All the students were in class. After passing the exam, the main character slumped down on his desk. He didn't really care about the result. Do-yun lay on his desk and thought to himself that he was very tired. The guy thought to himself that he couldn't concentrate on his studies because of everything that had happened in a couple of days. At this time, Lin-yu's classmate walked over and greeted the protagonist. Ling-yu smiled and asked cheerfully to the protagonist, "How did he write the exam?" The main character was very tired and angry. He shouted for the Ling-yu guy to leave him alone. Lin-yu told his friend that he would be able to catch up on the exam tomorrow. Do-yun asked his classmate what he wanted. After a short pause, Ling-yu told the protagonist that a detective was looking for him. The guy immediately got excited. The protagonist realized there was no time to lose. He ran out of the classroom and down the stairs. The guy went down into the basement and reached the right door, behind which was a secret room. Then the guy went to the button panel. The system gave him access to the room. There was a detective sitting at the desk. He calmly greeted the incoming protagonist. The detective told the boy to come in. There were many different students sitting at the table. The detective added that there would be a long conversation. The doors opened and another student came into the room. One of the guys told the student to sit here. The main character was sitting in his seat. He decided to look around. He wondered who else was around him. Suddenly the boy was very surprised. He noticed someone very familiar at the table. Do-yun saw the girl Seo Soo-hyung who was helping him with the cleaning. He was surprised that this schoolgirl was also related to the current affairs. The detective picked up the remote control and told the students he had something he wanted to show them. A man said that the body of a math teacher was found in the mountains near his home. The detective then added that Sue Hen and Officer Khan helped deal with the corpse. After that, the man announced that they had found something else. The students listened attentively. Detectives showed a photo of a small item they found on the body at the scene. One of the high school students with glasses asked, "Does he really see a chip in the picture?" The protagonist told the schoolboy that he had done his best. The student with glasses grudgingly replied. The schoolboy with the glasses said the chip was very badly damaged. The detective told the schoolboy to get to work and demanded results. The schoolboy with glasses demanded half a day for results, at which time the protagonist raised his hand and told those around him that he had a question. Do-yoon asked the people around him who was the person who looked like a complete copy of their math teacher. The people around him were silent. No one wanted to answer the boy's question. The protagonist realized he was in an awkward position with his question. The detective cheerfully told the guy that he was clueless and added that he would explain in a moment. The man said that the world around him in reality consists of two other worlds in one of which people live. Another world is called Librium. Most people don't know that another world exists. It can't be detected by satellites, but it exists. If you know how the worlds are connected, then you can move between them. The detective said that the world of Librium is completely different from Earth, but there are similarities between them. The man explained that both worlds were inhabited by people with exactly the same appearance. The detective pointed out that the people who took the protagonist's sister were connected to the parallel world. The parallel world also included the clone of the math teacher who wanted to kidnap the protagonist, after which the detective ended the meeting and all participants excused themselves. Lin Yu asked with excitement and interest from the protagonist, "Is he okay?" Do-yun replied irritably to his classmate to get away from him as he has a lot of weirdness to digest. A schoolgirl came up from behind and went straight to the main character. The protagonist remembered that the student had also just been here with him. The girl offered to go to the teacher and offer her condolences. The main character was surprised and confused. He didn't know what to say to the girl's proposal. After that, the Liu guy slapped the protagonist and told him to go bolder. The main character was angry with his classmate. He didn't know what to say back. After that, Do-yun went together with the schoolgirl. Together they heard Ling Yu say to them about the two students. Ling Yu's boyfriend was very embarrassed. He said that he was the one who suggested that his two friends go together. Ling Yu was outraged because his friends threw him on the bus to go with them. The schoolgirl said she was embarrassed. During the trip, Ling Yu was very much embarrassed and silent. He didn't say a word to his friend. The main character also stared silently out the window during the bus ride. Only the schoolgirl was fun. The girl liked that they were all three of them riding together now. Looking around, the schoolgirl noticed that there were no other people on the bus besides them. The schoolgirl asked with interest if the protagonist had any questions and saw other gifted guys and girls for the first time. The protagonist was thinking. He wanted to ask his classmate a lot of things. After a short pause, the boy told the girl that he was interested in something. The schoolgirl said that Do-yun could ask her. The protagonist timidly inquired about people from the parallel world of Librium. The main character asked the girl why people are always being kidnapped from their world. The schoolgirl listened attentively. The girl explained to the protagonist that people from the parallel world were constantly kidnapping someone from their reality. The two of them looked at the Ling Yu sitting behind them. At that time, Lin Yu was looking at something very carefully on his phone. The schoolgirl once again said that people are kidnapped all the time. Ling Yu said that people are kidnapped for experimentation. Du-yun interjected with great apprehension. Are they really being kidnapped for experimentation? Lin Yu guy reported that according to their lab reports, scientists from Librium are much better than Earth scientists, but they have few resources. After that, Ling Yu added to the excited girl, the thirst for knowledge of people from the parallel world is very strong, but they have no ethics. The guy speculated that the Liberium people might be planning to get the resources they need from their world. The protagonist wondered. He couldn't understand why the kidnappers were targeting a teacher from his school as well as him and his sister before Chi. Do-yun said that it's possible that his sister is still alive. Ling Yu's boyfriend confirmed the main character's assumption. After that, Ling Yue turned around and looked at the protagonist with great attention. Ling Yue interjected excitedly at the protagonist. Is the latter still worried? Do-yun replied sadly that the situation was very serious, and the scale of the problem was beyond him. Lin Yu told his friend that he should only be happy that he was alive. The schoolgirl thought sadly that anyone would be worried if they heard such a thing. Concentrating, the protagonist said he still had one more question. Do-yun asked his friends, how are they different from other people? The main character clarified how they could use their special abilities. Lin Yu asked his friend in surprise, wondering if he was joking. Ling Yu angrily shouted at the protagonist that he didn't understand anything even after his story about the Liberium. The main character said excitedly that he could see the past. He asked for the classmate to explain it to him. A girl intervened in the conversation and said that she would explain. The schoolgirl said seriously, "The guy's ability to use psychometry or Ling Yu-sun's talents are special, and not everyone can do such a thing." Du Yun pondered the girl's words. The schoolgirl said that the protagonist had something else to do. The schoolgirl added that the protagonist should see a different self in the parallel world of Librium. After that, the girl said to Du Yun to think about what she offered him. The protagonist saw himself very small in a room with his sister, as if they were from another world. The main character was walking down the hallway of a large building with his friends. The girl was in the lead, followed by the protagonist and his friend Lin Yu. Du Yun asked with grudging interest to his friend, "Why is he attached to his phone?" Ling Yu was looking at his smartphone. He said that they were still investigating the burned chip and a report should come today. The main character told a friend that he could check his phone when he heard the sound of a message. The schoolgirl irritably told the students that they had enough of their bickering. She also added that she had to go to the restroom and let the students go ahead. The main character said he was going to go into room number 4 in this building for a while. The protagonist went into a special room where incense was lit. In the room, the whole place was decorated with a special morning interior. The main character honored the fallen teacher. He bowed several times in complete silence, after which the guy looked closely at the portrait of the late math teacher. Du Yun decided that although he didn't particularly like the teacher, he didn't want to see him like this. The schoolboy was holding a folded morning napkin. He decided to himself that no one ever knows what will happen tomorrow. After the teacher's farewell ceremony, the protagonist sat silently in the hallway next to his friend. Du Yun asked unhappily, what was taking the girl so long to fumble around somewhere? Ling Yui irritably replied only that he could go and check for himself in the women's restroom. Suddenly the guy saw something very interesting on his phone. He screamed with delight. Lin Yu's boyfriend was very much amazed at what he saw on his phone. At the same time, the schoolgirl was in the restroom and decided to wash her hands before leaving. The girl stood by the wash basin and watched the water pouring from the faucet, after which the schoolgirl put her hands up and started washing them under the pressure of the water. The girl was washing her hands while the front door to the restroom creaked open. The girl was standing by the wash basin and didn't notice the stranger walk in. A female voice asked the girl if she was a student of Soha High School. The girl turned around and asked, "What is it?" A female scientist from a parallel world stood in front of her. The Ling Yu guy held out a smartphone to the protagonist with some message on it. The information from the phone reported a promotional sale. Du Yun angrily asked his friend, was it really a message from the detective? Ling Yu replied very sadly that he couldn't have known that he had received an advertisement on his phone. The protagonist told his friend unhappily that they had gotten excited over nothing. After that, the protagonist remembered his classmate Soo-hyun. He didn't realize where she had stayed for so long. The protagonist was walking down the hallway. He thought to himself that he might have missed the girl. The guy suggested that his friend look for the girl. He added that he should call if he saw her. The protagonist approached the entrance to the women's restroom stall. He froze by the door. Du Yun looked at the entrance to the toilet stall and thought to himself, it took the protagonist a long time to decide to come in. Suddenly, the main character was very surprised and worried. He looked at the floor in front of him. Du Yun saw a blue hairband lying near the passage to the restroom. The guy took the headband in his hand and remembered it belonged to a girl. She always wore it. Du Yun thought to himself very excitedly that he had seen something like this somewhere before. The protagonist activated his special powers. He saw how a girl from a parallel world with a gun kidnapped a schoolgirl and took her away in a car. The guy saw his own apartment in his visions. He decided to come home. Du Yun took the elevator to his floor, but could not understand what the kidnapper and the schoolgirl forgot in his house. The elevator arrived at the right floor. The guy still couldn't figure out how the kidnapper could have gotten his address. Protagonist walked up to the door and noticed that it had been kicked in hard. Du Yun was very frightened before he entered the apartment and decided to take a breather. Du Yun peeked through the open door. He realized that the girl was now inside his apartment. The protagonist walked leisurely through the apartment. There were muddy footprints everywhere. The lad walked leisurely to the door that led to the hall and peered through it. Suddenly, an unfamiliar female voice asked the guy why he was so cautious. Du Yun noticed the kidnapper standing and holding the schoolgirl in her arms. The kidnapper told the guy in a very calm voice that he was in his own home. Du Yun was very excited and asked the kidnapper who she was. He had already seen her in his memories. The guy decided to climb into the room and help save his classmate. The girl shouted very excitedly that the kidnapper had planted landmines all over the apartment and they could explode at any moment. The main character was scared and worried. He couldn't figure out what mines we were talking about. Looking closely, The protagonist noticed thin laser beams shining in all directions in the room. The kidnapper calmly explained to the protagonist that such threads were stretched throughout the apartment. The woman told the guy to try not to touch the laser threads. The kidnapper then warned the guy that a little touch could blow up the house. The guy froze and stared at the kidnapper. He wondered what he should do in such a situation. The woman from the parallel world looked at Do-yun without any emotion. After a short pause, the protagonist commanded himself that he must be perfectly calm. Do-yong. As calmly as possible, he asked the kidnapper what business had brought her to his house. The schoolboy told the kidnapper judiciously that she wasn't going to kill him if she lured him here. Do-yun said that if the woman wanted to kill him, she would have done it immediately and not kidnapped the schoolgirl. The woman from the parallel world listened to the protagonist absolutely without any emotion. Do-yun said in a sly voice to the woman that she had set traps around the house. Smiling, the protagonist added that all the traps in the house were just a common bluff. The protagonist reached out his hand to touch the laser beam in a completely calm manner. Do-yun touched the glowing beam and it simply fell apart. The guy calmly removed his fingers and said in a calm voice that this was exactly what he assumed. Suddenly, the protagonist shouted to the girl to grab the kidnapper. The woman got very excited and scared. She turned around to see what the girl was going to do. The schoolgirl shoved the kidnapper's hand back so that it hit the light beam. The woman from the parallel world shouted fearfully when she saw fire near her hand. The schoolgirl tried her hand. She felt that she had just a little bit left for the kidnapper to let her go. The protagonist noticed glowing beams flashing all around the room. The protagonist once again shouted loudly for the schoolgirl to apprehend the kidnapper. The woman got very angry. She yelled that the guy and the schoolgirl were making fun of her. At the same time, thin and strong threads appeared. They encircled the main character's arm. Threads flew from all directions to shackle Do-yun and prevent him from being able to help the girl. One of them threads grabbed the protagonist's leg so he couldn't move. In the end, the guy couldn't get close to the schoolgirl and fell to the floor. His leg was grabbed by the strings. The girl was very much frightened. She excitedly called the protagonist by name. The kidnapper said to herself that the protagonist was not badly injured in the fall. Suddenly, a very strong and bright white light appeared from behind the woman from the parallel world. The kidnapper was scared. She looked back very warily. A frightened schoolgirl shouted sharply at her kidnapper to stop. The girl saw the main character coming and yelled at him to attack the woman. The kidnapper was scared. She didn't expect the protagonist to get close to her. Do-yun grabbed the kidnapper's head with a formidable expression. Taking a breath, the protagonist said fearfully that he didn't mean to do that. Then the guy grabbed the kidnapper with his hand. She pulled her head back a little. The protagonist looked at the weakened kidnapper with a piercing gaze. The woman from the parallel world looked at the protagonist. She couldn't get free of him. There was silence in the protagonist's apartment after the incident. Small remnants of glowing lightning remained near the schoolgirl's hand. The last lightning bolt near the girl's hand extinguished, and she looked at what was now with Do-yun. The protagonist approached the female kidnapper. She was lying on the floor and showed no signs of life. The guy scrutinized the kidnapper lying there. He checked to see if she had a pulse. A schoolgirl approached. She looked at the protagonist and her unconscious captor. The schoolgirl thought fearfully to herself. She didn't understand how the main character had neutralized a dangerous woman from a parallel world. The protagonist moved his hand over the kidnapper. She jumped up and opened her eyes. It was as if she was being engulfed by lightning. The kidnapper was forcibly revived. The guy was still holding her head. Do-yun held the woman from the parallel world with one hand and placed the other hand on his head. Bright lightning bolts flashed all over the room. The kidnapper clutched her head. The guy tried to read her mind. The woman from the parallel world stood there, unable to defend herself in any way from the way the protagonist was affecting her head. The kidnapper ended up unconscious on the floor. The guy was very exhausted. He could barely stand on his feet. The exhausted schoolboy told his astonished girlfriend that he was able to read the kidnapper's mind directly. The girl was very much surprised. The guy was still shaking his head due to fatigue. Do-yun said that when he uses his ability, the other person sees the same thing as him. Such an effect shocked the kidnapper. The weary fellow said that using the features affects him a lot too. The protagonist grabbed the kidnapper who was lying unconscious and pulled her. The guy turned to the schoolgirl and asked for help to carry the lady. The protagonist opened the door to his room. He decided to put the kidnapper on his bed. The protagonist and the schoolgirl dumped the kidnapper's body on the bed. Do-yun and his girlfriend stood looking at the kidnapper lying on the bed for a long time. Suddenly, the schoolgirl felt very uncomfortable in this situation. The girl smiled and told the man in charge that she was leaving and wished him to take care. After a short pause, the guy called out to his girlfriend named Soo-hen. The main character asked that Soo-hyun tell absolutely no one about what he saw. Do-yun explained calmly that he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He asked his girlfriend if she promised to keep quiet. The girl got very agitated. She said that she agreed to the demands of the protagonist. Suhen walked to the door and told the guy goodbye, that they would see each other tomorrow. The protagonist waved goodbye to his girlfriend with a smile. The front door closed. The protagonist stood in the middle of the room. He thought about everything that had happened today at his house. Do-yoon remembered that he still had a lot of important things to do. He had to go to the meeting with Ling Yu. In a huge gymnasium, the main character was training against his classmate Lin Yu. The guys were practicing martial arts. Ling Yu was trying to impress his friend. Ling Yue used various techniques. He jumped high so that the protagonist couldn't hit him. The exhausted protagonist realized that his opponent has absolutely no weaknesses. The protagonist continued to fight with different punches. He tried to hit Lin Yu. A schoolgirl with blue hair watched the battle without any emotion. Ling Yue accelerated hard so that he could swipe the protagonist's hand. Do-yoon realized that his opponent had missed and had a chance to strike back. The protagonist realized that all he had to do now was fend off the blow his opponent was trying to give him. The main character was angry and exhausted. He realized he needed to prove himself in this battle. Do-yoon began to accumulate maximum energy in his hand for the decisive strike. Suddenly, the force completely left the protagonist and he stumbled. The opponent was very surprised. Ling Yue could not understand why his opponent had fallen. The protagonist fell to the floor and had no strength to get up. Do-yoon sat exhausted on the floor. He was very tired and could hardly catch his breath. Ling Yu slipped his hand into the protagonist's and asked excitedly if he was all right. The protagonist swung his hand sharply. He didn't want to grab his classmate's hand with his own. Do-yoon was very angry. He didn't do well in today's fight, but he didn't want to admit it. The protagonist responded very angrily to his classmate that he didn't need help. Lin Yu looked at his friend and told him calmly that they would be done for today then. After that, Ling Yu walked to the stairs to the exit of the gym. Do-yoon was sitting on the floor. The main character sat on the floor by himself for a very long time. He was remembering the fight he'd just had. Do-yoon shoved his hand off the floor and decided to get up and leave the hall. When Ling Yu was leaving the gym, he met a schoolgirl. The girl said that she thought he was going home after going to see his teacher. A schoolgirl asked why Lin Yu sees his rivals in guys who are clearly not his level. The guy thought for a moment. Ling Yue didn't expect to meet a girl in this place. After thinking for a bit, Ling Yu said that Junpei had only recently learned of his ability. The girl rejoiced and smiled. She told the guy that she hadn't expected him to say that. Ling Yu asked the girl without any emotion, "Why did she come up here?" The interlocutor told the guy that they were immediately requested by a detective. The girl explained to her interlocutor that the detective wanted the boys to do something. The Ling Yu guy thought for a moment. He realized that he would have to go to the detective now. At this time, the protagonist's sister was still imprisoned by people from the parallel world. Sitting in her cell, she clinked her drink glass. The girl shouted menacingly to the scientist to bring her some food right away. Sister resented that the kidnappers could have at least stocked up on good food. The scientists watched the prisoner's behavior with interest. The scientist with glasses was sitting at his desk. He was very annoyed by the noise coming from the girl. Scientists were very angry and nervous because of the constant noise coming from the cell. The scientist asked his subordinate, "Have you heard from Kaylee?" The girl replied that Kaylee had met with the target 16 hours ago. The girl reported that it had been 10 hours since the portal had closed. The scientist asked if other portals had been found. The girl said that there might be another portal, but it was far away and therefore hard to find. The scientist indicated to the girl to send someone else. At this time, Kaylee was slowly coming to her senses in the protagonist's apartment. She opened her eyes. The woman from the parallel world sat up on the bed. She didn't realize where she was. It was a clear day outside and the birds were singing in the yard. The main character was sitting at home with his guest. The birdsong from the street came through the window into the protagonist's room. Kaylee woman said surprised that Do-yoon also had special abilities. The guy was quietly reading a book at the time. The protagonist put the book aside and told the quiet woman that there was nothing surprising about his abilities. The guy explained that everyone in their company had special powers. The woman was surprised. Do-yoon slammed the book shut and told the woman not to move. She needed time to recover. The guy got up and said Kaylee had high regeneration. She woke up 12 hours later. The woman sitting on the bed scared asked the guy what he wanted from her. The protagonist said very calmly to the woman that he wanted to ask her. Do-yoon asked sternly of Kaylee, "What does she want and what does she seek from him?" The woman from the parallel world shouted to the guy that she wasn't just going to tell him anything. The protagonist was not surprised by this response from the woman. He listened to her absolutely calmly. Do-yoon told the woman that he didn't want anything from her. He said he could mess with her brain a little more so she wouldn't wake up at all. The main character said he could call his people to take care of Kaylee. After a short pause, the protagonist said menacingly that he would ask differently of the woman. The guy asked very sternly to the kidnapper if his sister was alive before he. Kaylee explained that kidnapped girl is a very valuable specimen to them. In the end, the kidnappers won't kill the protagonist's sister like they do other people. Scientists from a parallel world will conduct various tests on the kidnapped girl. The protagonist asked Kaylee how he personally could get into their world of Librium. The woman told the boy that there was no way he could enter their world yet. Do-yun was surprised. The protagonist asked with interest, "So why can't he go to a parallel world?" Kaylee explained that the portal here had closed and would not reopen until 2 months later. The woman told the guy that they would have been in Librium as early as yesterday if the guy had followed her orders. Do-yun first asked the woman, "Do we have to wait 2 more months for the passage to open?" After a little thought, the protagonist offered his guests from the parallel world to stay with him. After that, the guy told the woman he wanted to ask her for a small favor. The guest from the parallel world realized that she would have to go on the protagonist's terms. Kaylee sat resting on the couch. She thought the protagonist was an even bigger weirdo than she'd realized. Do-yun interrogated the woman. Are they really not going to kill his sister? The woman told the protagonist that his sister's death would be a great loss to them. The protagonist said contentedly, pleased with this response from the woman. Do-yun handed Kali new clothes and said that in 2 months they would go to another world together. Afterward, the guy asked his guest to tell him about the Liberium. The guy checked with the woman to see if she thought the offer was a fair deal. Kaylee, reading the book, thought to herself that this was the first time she had seen a person who wanted to be a guinea pig. The next day, the protagonist met his close friend Lin Yu at school. Lin Yu greeted his friend with a huge and joyful smile. He was very cheerful. Do-yun asked his friend why he was so carefree. He reminded him that there were exams coming up. Lin Yu asked very sternly of his friend if there was anything he wanted to tell him. Friend reminded the protagonist to call him when he found the girl Su Hen. Lin Yu said that the girl herself called him yesterday and told him that she was free. The main character told his friend in a calm voice that he was apologizing for not calling. Lin Yu told his friend that he had to go back to the lab to deal with the problem. The main character asked what the problem was. Lin Yu told his friend that if he was sorry, he should go with him. Do-yun asked with interest to his school friend, where do they have to go for a couple hours? The protagonist and his companion arrived at the Arium Pharmacy building. Lin Yu explained that he had previously told this company that they would come to the interview. They should be waiting at the entrance. The main character got very excited. Lee Yu-sun asked his friend if he could hear him. Do-yun shouted to his friend, very frightened that he couldn't go alone. The main character told his friend that he was ready to go anywhere but here. He asked why they had come here in the first place. Ling Yu realized with great surprise that he had not yet said the purpose of coming to the main character. At this time, some woman from outside called out to him. The woman ran towards Lin Yu and asked, "Is he the schoolboy who called her yesterday?" The woman smilingly looked at Ling Yu and told him to follow her. The guy answered the woman that he was coming. The protagonist thought to himself reassuringly that all this must not be for long. The main character was walking around the Pharmacy Corporation building with his friend Lin Yu. Do-yun said cheerfully that usually only school field trips are allowed into this assignment. The woman told the boys that they were shown everything since they were acquaintances of the parkmaster. Ling Yu shouted that he had always dreamed of going to this building. The protagonist thought sadly to himself that they didn't even study at the Kembyo. The woman cheerfully asked the boys if she could show them the laboratory. The school children replied that they would. He walked up to his friend and kicked him from behind. Do-yun asked the whispering Ling Yu why did they come to this building. Ling Yu replied calmly to his friend that the scientists working for this drone company disappeared very often. Ling Yu said that if the missing information is true, they should have reported to the police or told the news. The protagonist added that he hadn't heard anything like that. He got into the elevator with his friend. Do-yun asked how they could have such information. Ling Yu replied that he had no idea. Lin Yu told Taiko that they were sent because it sounded very suspicious. The main character was excited. Ling Yu told his friend to buy time while he looked around. The woman told the students to follow her. Do-yun asked his friend, "Is this really why he brought him here?" The woman led the boys to the door of the room. She explained that this was a laboratory. The woman explained to the students that they wouldn't be allowed to look at everything, so they'd look at the room from the hallway while the scientists were at lunch. After that, the woman tried to open the door with her card. The system gave an error. The woman was very much startled because she couldn't get in. The school children looked at her excitedly. The woman kept trying to open the door with the card. She didn't understand what had happened. The woman turned around and said the card was probably broken. She told the guys to wait while she made a new one. Do-yun and Ling Yu, still surprised looking at the woman, said that they agree. Lin Yu asked in a bored voice to his friend if he wanted a drink. The protagonist walked over to the card reader and examined it closely. Do-yun said judiciously, it was likely that the problem with the door opening was not the card. The main character excitedly said that someone had changed the password. Lin Yu was very much surprised at such words. After some thought, the protagonist said that the password had been changed by one of the guards 10 minutes ago. Ling Yu asked with surprise, why was it necessary to change the password? Du Yun pressed the right keys on the remote control and the door opened as a result. The boys looked carefully and excitedly inside the lab. Ling Yu said that the Nuna woman would come back to them with a new card. He asked that the protagonist stay and buy him some time. Ling Yu said that he would go and quickly check everything he could. He also added that Du Yun would let him know if anything went wrong. The protagonist angrily asked, can't you just take it and wait? The protagonist's friend completely ignored him and ran to the lab. A Nuna woman came in. She said that every month passwords and cards are changed for security reasons. The woman asked the protagonist in surprise, where did the second student go? Du Yun said cheerfully and casually. His friend urgently ran to the toilet. The Nuna woman smiled at the guy and said then they need to speed up. Du Yun explained that his friend was gone for a long time. He said he wanted to ask the woman a few questions before Ling Yu came back. At this time, Lin Yu was walking through the long corridors of the science lab. He was careful not to be seen by anyone. Ling Yu heard a group of people walking nearby. He hid around a corner. The guy looked around the corner and thought to himself that the lab wasn't so empty after all. After thinking for a bit, Ling Yu decided to himself that everything looked quite normal. The protagonist noticed an interesting sign. He thought it was something he was interested in. Guy walked up to the sign. It had the numbers of the different offices that were on the floor. Ling Yue looked carefully at the inscription. It indicated the location of Laboratory X. After that, the guy got into the elevator to get to the right floor. To himself, Ling Yu thought to himself, everything around him looks very strongly suspicious. The guy went to the entrance. He saw there a remote with a code lock and double protection. Ling Yu thought. He didn't know how to get to the lab he wanted. After that, Lin Yu looked up and saw the ventilation grate. He decided to climb into it. The guy carefully climbed up the ventilation shaft and put the grate back in place. Lin Yu reached the lab through the ventilation shaft. He looked through the grate into the lab and noticed that no one was there. Lin Yu opened the grate and jumped to the floor from the ventilation shaft. The guy landed quietly and looked around. There was silence all around. Ling Yu saw various laboratory equipment around him. There were no people around. The guy thought to himself that he was in a very ordinary laboratory. A schoolboy put his hand on the table. He noticed that there was old equipment around. He figured they must have made a mistake. Ling Yue thought he was running out of time. He realized it was time to leave. Suddenly something caught the schoolboy's attention. He looked to the side in surprise. There was a detective sitting in a chair nearby. He was watching the whole thing closely. The man scrutinized the interior of the lab. He didn't see any people. The detective remained silent and continued to sit in his chair. It was as if he was expecting something. The detective smirked. He thought to himself that the victim had already taken the bait. The protagonist was sitting in the office of a drugstore company at the time, chatting with a woman. With interest, the guy asked the woman what is the social package in their company. A woman was telling a schoolboy about the social package. Du Yong pretended to listen attentively to the woman. The protagonist was very worried. He was mentally thinking that his friend Li Yusun should come back soon. Suddenly the door opened and Ling Yusun appeared in the room. He asked the woman and her friend with interest if they had waited for him. Ling Yu entered the room as if nothing had happened. He tried to look as suspicious as possible. The woman replied to the schoolboy that she was answering questions for the dunya. Lin Yu asked the woman, "Did she get the card sorted out?" The woman said she was fine. The woman then went to the access panel and calmly opened the door with her card. The woman said that the laboratory occupies 2 floors. Each researcher gets as much space as possible. The protagonist asked his friend very quietly, "Did you find anything interesting here?" Lin Yu calm and cheerfully replied to his friend that he had found nothing of interest. The protagonist was surprised by this answer. He had hoped that the schoolboy would still discover something interesting. Ling Yu confirmed that the lab was just a rumor. He didn't actually find anything. The protagonist was angry that his friend dragged him here for nothing. Du Yun told his companion that they should get out of here as soon as possible. Lin Yu called out to a woman named Nuna. She turned to the schoolboy. The boy cheerfully asked as the woman gave him a tour of the dining room. The woman rejoiced at such an offer. Nuna shouted that their canteen had the best sandwiches. The protagonist passed a sign that had the numbers of the various rooms on the floor. There was a number on the sign where the lab that Lin Yu visited might be. After a long excursion, the protagonist came home and opened the door. The boy thought to himself that he should fix the lock already. At that time, the schoolboy was greeted by a Kali woman. Du Yun was surprised to see a woman in front of him. She was holding a box of half-finished products. Kaylee asked with interest, "Do people always eat this kind of deliciousness?" The woman cheerfully said the coffee drink was the best thing she'd ever tasted. The protagonist was surprised to hear such words from Kaylee. The schoolboy took his shoes off. He told the woman that she seemed to have taken up residence in his apartment. The guy noticed how the apartment was trashed all over the place. Do-yoon saw that the whole apartment was very untidy and in a sloppy condition. The guy looked at the hall in his apartment. It was a mess. Do-yoon was very angry. Next to him stood a quite satisfied and joyful Kali woman. The Lin-Yu boy walked down to the entrance of the room where the detective was waiting for him. Then the guy went to the door and dialed the code combination on the lock. The detective heard the schoolboy's entrance. He sat in his chair and turned to the boy. The man turned to the guy and asked if he had found what he needed. Lin-Yu informed the detective that he had surveyed the entire area as per his orders. The detective listened very carefully to all the words from the boy and looked at him. The schoolboy reported that he had found absolutely no direct connection between the missing scientists and the world of Librium. The man asked the boy what he had found. Ling-Yu stuck his hand in his pocket and said there was a suspicious lab in the building. The schoolboy took a small bluish crystal out of his pocket. He said he found it. The detectives got very excited when he saw the rock. He jumped up from his seat. Ling-Yu said he doesn't know what kind of thing he found, but he has a kind of strange feeling. The guy said that when he sees the crystal, he feels the same way he does when he sees the portal. As soon as he saw the rock, it was as if he was immediately sucked there. Lin-Yu told the important detective that they should definitely investigate this. The man praised the schoolboy and said he was free to go. As the guy was heading for the exit, a man called his name. The detective told the schoolboy that he never let him down. He added that he hoped it would always be like that. After that, Ling-Yue excitedly and joyfully confirmed the detective's words. Ling-Yu left the detective's office. He left thinking about something of his own. When the schoolboy came out of the door, he was followed very closely by a detective standing off to the side. The man was very annoyed. He looked at the schoolboy with anger. While at the protagonist's house, a woman read a comic book and excitedly yelled that she saw envy there. The main character was very surprised. He didn't know what the woman was talking about. Kaylee held the comic book in her hands and told the guy to look at the pictures carefully. The woman revealed to the main character that one comic book hero is jealous of another. Do-yoon asked the woman how much she had read since she didn't even know the Earthling language. Kaylee explained that the comic book was full of pictures. Protagonist asked by a woman, how could a person from Librium know their language? The schoolboy told the woman they couldn't have the same language, so the people in the Librium were able to learn their language. The woman excitedly slammed the comic book shut. She wanted to explain everything to the guy. Kaylee told the protagonist that they were also learning how to communicate with Earthlings, after which the woman came close to the schoolboy and looked at him very carefully. Kaylee explained that they understand each other not because they speak the same language with different alphabets. The protagonist got very agitated because the woman from the parallel world was so close. Kaylee looked carefully at the schoolboy and wanted to explain to him what was wrong. A woman told a guy that they don't communicate through language but through telepathy. There's something that connects her and the boy, and that's why they're communicating. The main character's sister woke up in a strange place. She was very shocked. The girl was sitting in an obscure suit on the floor. She was still in her glass chamber. The sister started rubbing her arm. She wanted to bring herself to her senses as soon as possible. After that, the girl started rubbing her leg with her hand. She wanted to take her mind off her thoughts a bit. Gradually, the sister came to her senses. She realized that what she had seen was just a dream. The scientist approached and carefully asked the girl, "Is she sweating because the room is very hot?" Then the sister rushed to the glass wall of the room and started banging on it with all her might. The girl asked the surrounding scientists very angrily, what on earth had they done to her? The scientist in the white coat asked the girl a little surprised, "Does she remember everything?" The scientist heard the girl yell very angrily that she remembered everything as she was in a lot of pain. The girl said exhaustedly, "Is the scientist joking?" The scientist told the girl to tell more about what she felt. The main character's sister was very angry. She felt very bad. The scientist very calmly asked the girl if she was dizzy and nauseous. He demanded that the girl tell him everything in detail. The sister was very much frightened and angry with the scientist because of his questions. The sister angrily shouted to the scientist that she was not a guinea pig and demanded that she be released now. The scientist told the girl calmly that she was in a lot of pain and she would have to be patient for a while. Afterwards, the scientist explained to the girl that she would be released when her twin arrived. They were in trouble, so they sent someone else to fetch the protagonist. The scientist pressed a button on the remote. He said the rules, there are rules. The scientist added that the girl should be patient. The temperature in my sister's cell began to rise sharply. There was steam all around. The girl became very sick and heavy. She staggered and couldn't sit up. Due to the intense heat, the girl fainted and collapsed on the floor of the cell. The protagonist was sitting in his apartment in a high-rise building at the time. Do-yun sadly noticed that his girlfriend from the parallel world of Kaylee had simply disappeared somewhere. The boy looked sadly at the lowered bed and thought to himself, why did he believe woman? The protagonist couldn't figure out where the alien from the parallel world in the big city had gone. At the same time, Kaylee moved leisurely and cautiously through a city that was unfamiliar to her. The woman was very excited. She realized she couldn't wait another 2 whole months for the portal to open. Kaylee moved through the city streets and knew she had to find another portal. The woman realized she had to get out or things would be bad for her. Kaylee remembered a scientist she worked with who called her rude names all the time. A woman was moving quickly down the street. Suddenly, someone from outside called her name. Kaylee was very much surprised. She knew that no one in this town could know her at all. The woman noticed a young man with yellow hair sitting on the wall. He was looking at her with great attention. The man smilingly told the woman that he was very much worried. Kaylee was very unpleasantly surprised. This meeting wasn't in her plans. The woman asked the man how he got here. The man took Kaylee's hand and said that he had begged the professor to be trusted to find her. The man said he was so worried he couldn't sleep. The man recalled that Kaylee had never failed a mission. Afterwards, the man said fearfully that he had decided that Kaylee had found another chosen one for her. Kaylee woman rudely shouted to the man to say no more, as she did not want to listen to his heresy. The man said very ingratiatingly that he was doing all this because he had talent. The woman said she was on a conscientious mission, and she would not work with a man under any difficulties. Kaylee said very convincingly to her interlocutor to tell the professor that she could catch the protagonist. After that, the woman started running away. The man was very upset. Kaylee decided to return home to the protagonist. She couldn't understand why her supervisors sent a man to her. The protagonist saw Kaylee and was surprised to tell the woman that he thought she had escaped. The woman told the guy very irritably that she was back from a walk. Do-yun asked the woman in surprise, "Do they go out through the window for a walk?" Afterward, the guy noticed that the woman's feet were very dirty, as if she had been running a lot. Do-yun was very unhappy about the girl walking around the apartment with dirty feet. The protagonist ordered the woman to go to the bathroom and wash her feet. At this time in the lab, a student with glasses was researching information in detail on the internet. The lab was full of all kinds of research equipment. The student watched the monitor screen carefully. He analyzed the information. A bluish crystal from a parallel world floated on a table in a special vessel nearby. The guy noticed an interesting news story. It was about an Arium company. The student was surprised to notice a familiar face in the photograph. It was the young protagonist with his sister. Kaylee's woman was sitting on the couch at the main character's house. She was sad. After a long pause, the woman told the guy that he had nothing to eat at home. The protagonist turned around and grudgingly told the guest that she was getting stale. Kaylee told the guy rather and capriciously that there really wasn't any food. She shook the empty box. Do-yun thought about the woman's words. He decided to himself that he would have to ask for an extra scholarship. Kaylee was sitting there looking at a box of food. The guy suggested the woman go out tonight. The woman was very frightened and surprised. She asked, "Do Earthers really eat on the street?" The protagonist and his girlfriend were walking down the streets at night past the stores. The streets of the city glittered with bright lights. Boyfriend and girlfriend were looking for a place to eat. Kaylee told the surprised protagonist that he was wearing different clothes today. The guy explained that it was Sunday. The main character told his girlfriend they'd get groceries tomorrow. In the meantime, they could eat at the restaurant. He opened the door to the place. The guy and the woman were sitting inside a fast food joint. Very soon, the protagonist and the Kali woman were brought food on trays. The woman asked the guy with great interest, "What is the name of such a food?" Do-yun replied to the woman that such a food is called hamburger. Do-yun told his companion that she could eat for now, but he wanted to ask her something. Do-yun looked at Kaylee with great attention and asked, what did she see in the portal? At this time, a man from a parallel world with yellow hair silently approached the table. The man looked carefully at the woman sitting at the table and called her by name. The man menacingly asked Kaylee how she could do this to him. The woman was surprised and frightened. The man then looked at the protagonist and said he was their test subject. The man became angry and said in a harsh voice that the woman had acted cruelly. Kaylee was still holding the hamburger in her hands. She noticed the glass with the drink starting to freeze and shake. The woman shouted to the terrified protagonist to be more careful. In order not to waste time, woman rushed to the aid of the protagonist. The man with yellow hair looked at Kaylee with resentment and hatred. Female Kaylee protected the protagonist with herself when ice shards flew at him. Do-yun was very frightened. He couldn't imagine that they would be attacked in the restaurant. Kaylee irritably shouted to the man that he could have killed the protagonist. The man, frightened, said they need Do-yun alive. The professor needs a live specimen. Then the man asked the woman, did she forget that killing is their job? The woman asked the man fearfully and menacingly, how many hours had he been here? Kaylee then grabbed the man and started demanding he tell her where the portal was. The man looked calmly at the woman. Kaylee continued to demand that he answer her. Suddenly, the woman felt the man seem to slip out of her grasp. Kaylee ended up sitting on the floor by herself. There was a pile of ashes around her. The woman was very angry about missing her co-worker. The protagonist noticed that he was sitting in a huge puddle of water that was under his feet. The man from the parallel world said that the main character is just as human as the others. Kaylee asked sternly to her colleague, does the latter refuse to obey the professor's order? The man excitedly asked the woman what she liked about Do-yoon. The man shouted that the professor was getting rid of those who were no longer useful to him. The woman then accelerated and kicked her co-worker with all her might. Kaylee hit the man with all her might and he was swept aside afterwards. The man could barely stand on his feet. The woman threateningly demanded that he repeat his words. The man told the woman not to pretend she didn't know. She should know. The man shouted to the woman that she should know what the professor had done. Kaylee again prepared to hit her colleague. The woman didn't have time to strike her opponent. The man managed to grab Kaylee's fist with his hand. The man asked angrily, how could Kaylee stay loyal to the professor knowing how he felt about her? After which the man threw an ice cube in his rival's direction. Kaylee managed to dodge in time to protect herself from the pile of ice flying at her. The man shouted to the woman that she was just an outlandish animal to the professor. Kaylee grabbed a chair in her hands, and then the woman threw the chair sideways and upward so that it hit the ceiling. The chair hit the fire department's sensor. There was a very large explosion. The sensor on the ceiling activated and from it squelched jets of water into the room. The woman decided to attack her co-worker. She rushed towards him, after which the woman began beating the man, demanding that he answer her question. The exhausted man shouted to the woman that he had come to free her. After saying that, the woman stopped hitting the man. The woman was still holding the man by his clothes. She remembered the portal. Kaylee demanded of the man that he immediately answer where the portal he had come through was. The man held out his hand and said in a weak voice that he could tell where the portal was. The woman was looking intently at her colleague. At this time, the man looked in surprise in the direction where the protagonist was. Do-yoon was startled to notice how his body began to freeze starting from his leg. The main character was very frightened. The woman excitedly called out to Do-yoon. The man shouted menacingly that if he killed the protagonist, Kaylee would have no reason to stay in this world. The main character was almost completely frozen. To himself, he felt very cold. The overjoyed man shouted that he and Kaylee would now be able to go back together. Suddenly, the woman and the man heard a noise, as if something had broken. They saw shards of ice. Librium is a special parallel world inhabited by a woman named Kaylee. The world is extremely advanced scientifically, and society is very highly developed. The advanced people of Librium have always been in constant search of knowledge. At one point, a people from a parallel world decided to encroach on the status of gods. Such a decision was fatal and led to a very extensive disaster. Eventually, the rivers in the Librium began to dry up. This became a big problem for people. Then the ground was covered with cracks. Eventually, people had nowhere else to live. After that, the sky in the Librium became covered with gray house clouds. But the ancestors from the parallel world still managed to get a piece of divine power. Their ancestors were able to discover a completely different and very necessary world. A world that is very similar to the former Librium is the earthly world where the protagonist lives. Do-yoon was at home in his apartment with a Kali woman from a parallel world. Protagonist asked the woman, have they begun to pass into their world for resources? The woman told the guy that organisms from her world could only live on Earth for a couple days. The protagonist wondered and wondered. He remembered how Kaylee fought against the man who wanted to take her. Do-yoon remembered the words of the man who said that killing it's their job. The protagonist asked angrily to the woman, is it their goal to kill their people? The woman walked over to the window and calmly replied to the guy that he was absolutely right. Do-young asked the woman angrily, is he harboring a murderer at home? Kaylee said she had to finish. Kaylee explained that they don't kill the first people they meet. They have specific targets. Protagonist asked by a woman who chooses the targets for assassination. The states or some mafia. Kaylee calmly replied to the guy that they kill a wide variety of people. The target could be ordinary citizens, rich people, or even old people and children. The protagonist angrily clenched his fists and asked, so why are aliens from a parallel world killing people? The woman explained to the guy that the same people live in the Librium and on Earth. Kaylee said it could be that Kim Do-young's boyfriend died in Librium world. Then the Librium people go to Earth and kill a copy of the protagonist. After thinking for a bit, Do-yoon asked the woman, why do they move around and kill copies? Kaylee replied to the guy that they do that to reduce the risks. There was nothing else she could say to the protagonist. Identical people can't live in the same world at the same time. A visitor can be a maximum of 3 days. The woman added that if the visitor exceeded the limit, he would be thrown back to his world. Do-yoon remembered the case of the man from Librium. Guy asked the woman, "How can she be in the Earth world longer than 3 days?" Kaylee wanted to tell me about her earthly counterpart. The woman reported that her Earth counterpart was dead. As a result, they are not in the same world and there is no urgency for her to go back. Protagonist asked excitedly by a woman to explain what was going on with his sister to Chai. Suddenly, the protagonist froze. He felt as if visions had arisen within him. Do-yoon clearly saw as if his little sister ran out of the room to the balcony to the railing. The excited boy ran up to his sister before Hai and asked fearfully what she was doing. The protagonist reached out his hand in time to grab his little sister. Do-yoon grabbed her sister's clothes, but she held onto the balcony railing with her hands. Then the boy saw his sister fall down from a great height. The boy looked down from the balcony with great fear and consternation at the girl who had fallen out. The protagonist saw his sister lying dead on the ground in a large pool of blood. Do-yoon Yasno saw the body of his younger sister lying lifeless on the ground. Suddenly, the protagonist saw as if his sister had been resurrected for a moment and was standing in front of him. The main character was terrified. He thought it couldn't happen at all. The woman, frightened, asked the guy if he was okay. She grabbed him by the shoulders. The protagonist waved the woman away and said calmly that he was fine. Do-yoon told Kali that he has to go to school tomorrow, so he should get some sleep. The guest from the parallel world watched intently as the dejected boy walked to his room. The next day, the protagonist came to school. He was walking through the building. A schoolgirl was walking down the steps and noticed the main character walking beside her. The girl greeted the schoolboy and asked him how he had spent his weekend. Do-yoon waited for his girlfriend and told her in return that things were going so far. The schoolgirl excitedly told the guy that he didn't look important. She asked if he was okay. The protagonist smiled at the schoolgirl and told her he was fine. The boy asked with interest to himself as to why they were being drafted. After that, the protagonist swayed sideways. He had trouble staying on his feet. The guy felt he couldn't stand. He leaned in the corner. Suddenly, a female student with blue hair appeared from the side. Maine asked the schoolgirl who was that just next to them. A schoolgirl with blue hair asked the guy unhappily "What's he looking at?" A schoolgirl with blue hair walked up and grabbed the girl under her arm. The girlfriend told the guy that Ji-hee approached her. After that, Ji-hee looked angrily at the main character and said he was a pervert. Ji-hee then directed her girlfriend further down the school hallway. The protagonist couldn't understand what kind of new girl Ji-hee had just been in front of him. The main character walked with the detective through the corridors of the building. The man told the guy that this laboratory is needed to attract special people and develop their abilities. Do-yoon silently followed the detective through the long and bright corridors. The detective told the guy that the lab has extensive facilities. There's room for training. The scientists are also looking for a method to stop the flow of people from the Librium. Suddenly, the man stopped and asked, "Did the protagonist go to the Arium Company last week with his friend Yu-sun?" The protagonist calmly confirmed to the man that he went to the Arium Company. The detective informed the protagonist as they walked down the hallway that they were constantly investigating places like the Arium Company for the possible presence of Librium people. The guy was a little surprised. He stopped and asked the man what this was all about. The detective explained that it wasn't at all like the people from the parallel world weren't just after those with superpowers. Do-yoon said incredulously to the detective that he could not believe that such a reason was a real reason for the existence of such a laboratory. Afterward, the guy told the man that he wasn't sure if his lab was doing everything solely to build relationships with people from other places. The protagonist firmly told the detective that he didn't want to get further involved. The man calmly addressed the guy by name. The detective said Do-yoon is very smart and very quick-witted. Then the detective told the guy instructively that he should learn to hide his intentions when he was pursuing a target. After that, the man fell silent. With a satisfied look, did he get ready to say something else to the guy? The detective asked the surprised protagonist if he knew about his powers. Do-yoon silently and attentively looked in front of him and saw Detective Han. The detective said that this lab was a branch of the government. He also added that they were unlikely to be able to stop the Librium people for good. The man explained that people from the parallel world were very persistent and stubborn. Do-yoon recalled to himself all the people from the Librium he had seen. After much deliberation, the protagonist asked the man, "Is their purpose to suppress?" The detective explained back to the guy that all decisions are made at the top, at which time the detective noticed a guy with white hair approaching them. The man told the guy to give the protagonist a tour of the lab. The guy lazily replied that he didn't have time for that. After a brief pause, the guy looked around at the protagonist and told him to follow him. Do-yoon agreed to take a walk around the lab with the guy. The two of them ended up walking silently down the long and deserted corridors of the lab. The protagonist was silent. He wanted to ask the boy something, but he couldn't make up his mind. The guy turned around and asked Do-yoon if he saw it strange that no one was asking questions here. The protagonist asked in surprise at his interlocutor. Had the latter heard his words? After that, the main character turned around and thought about it. He had a lot of questions for the guy. Do-yoon excitedly explained to his new acquaintance that there were many things that didn't add up and seemed suspicious to him. The boy replied that the others also shared the protagonist's concern. The guy sadly told the protagonist that no one has found the answer yet. After that, the guy gave Do-yoon a strange look and said, "There are reasons of their own for staying here." The guy ended up telling me that the lab was just recently completed. The guy explained to the main character that all the contestants were about his age and for him to memorize them. The protagonist had known Ling Yu-sun, a high school student, and Soo-hyun, a girl, for a long time. Afterwards, the protagonist saw a girl with blue hair named Jae, who was a bit familiar to him. He asked his companion how old she was. The guy explained that the girl was a hockey star but then broke her leg in elementary school. At that time, Ji-hee picked up a bat and wanted to fight someone. The girl with the bat went full throttle against her opponents. The guy said that Ji-hee was very strong and that the protagonist shouldn't mess with her. Ji-hee was swinging the bat in all directions. She shouted to the Soo-hen girl to relax. Soo-hyun's girlfriend was very excited. She cheered herself up by saying that she could handle it. Ji-hee attacked the girl Soo-hee with her bat with a great run and swing. After that, Ji-hee was surprised to see that her opponent was able to repel the attack. Ji-hee was surprised as the girl was able to repel the attack with fire. Soo-hee said angrily to her rival that she was underestimating her. Ji-hee stood and held the bat in her hands. She was preparing for an attack from her rival. Soo-hee was running at full speed. She yelled for Ji-hee. Even she didn't think it would be easy. Ji-hee watched as her rival ran at her at full speed. She thought it would be easier if Soo-hee recognized everything right away. Ji-hee then crouched down and got ready to jump. She thought that her rival was very stubborn. Ji-hee thought to herself that effort alone might not be enough. At this time, the running Soo-hee looked at her rival with fear. It quickly became apparent that the bat Ji-hee was holding was very large. After that, Ji-hee angrily asked the girl, "Can Soo-hee burn such a huge bat?" The protagonist watched the girls fight. He thought to himself fearfully that he should be careful with Ji-hee. The guy reported that there was a Jun-pee sitting on the steps, who was Detective Han's younger brother. At the end, the guy said there was someone else he wanted to introduce to the main character. The guy pointed to a girl with yellow hair and said her name was Hee-Soo-nuna. Hee-Soo-nuna is a very quiet girl, so no one knows what's on her mind. The guy added that the Chi-Soo girl knows how to say hello, so the protagonist can feel free to do so. After that, the main character got really scared. He saw a girl named Ji-hee who was angry. Ji-hee girl asked very angrily what happened to Jun-pee and why did he stand up there. The protagonist overhears a guy named Jun-pyo talking to a girl named Ji-hee in a very angry manner. Soo-hen ended up having to grab Ji-hee's girlfriend and hold her down to calm down. In the science lab at the time, there was a professor and a man sitting at the console. The man was silent. He felt guilty for not being able to guide Kaylee and the protagonist. The professor shouted angrily to the man that he could not be trusted. He was sent to bring the woman and the boy here. The man tried to justify himself. He explained that Kaylee couldn't return because the portal was closed. The professor angrily told the man that he didn't need people like that who couldn't follow a simple order. The man stood and silently listened to the insult from the professor. He was silent. He was silent, at which time the man heard a very loud noise from the side. He turned to the side. The man saw the protagonist's sister sitting in the cell looking at him. The girl saw the man looking at her and showed him a finger in response. The man thought to himself that the girl even had the same expression as her brother. At that time, the woman was in the training range. She was learning how to hit targets. Suddenly, the woman noticed that her gun was completely out of ammunition. Hee-soo heard a dry click in the gun. That was the end of her training. The woman realized there was no more ammunition left to shoot at all. Hee-soo-nuna thought very sadly to herself that it was all over for her for today. On a clear and fine day, a man was walking with a woman through the city streets with a cup of coffee. The man said cheerfully that there was good weather all around. He walked to the front. The man said it was getting colder and winter was coming. He asked the woman if the guy was still in the basement. Hee-soo-nuna remembered the computer guy and said he didn't want to go out in the sunlight. The man smiled to himself because of the guy's hatred of daylight. The woman told her interlocutor that the man's coffee was shaking. The man hesitated. He didn't answer anything to the woman and just stood silent. The woman thought surprised to herself that she didn't see any reaction from the man. A man was drinking coffee and heard Hee-soo-nuna telling some old woman that you can't sell on the street. The old woman excitedly replied to the woman that she had been trading here for 5 years. Chi-soo replied that it was all illegal. The old woman then grabbed the woman by the arm and asked her to turn a blind eye to the offense. Hee-soo replied that she could not. The old woman began to gather herself. She didn't like the way the woman was treating the old man. The man and the woman watched the old woman gradually moving away from them for a long time. The man gently told the woman that she could have allowed the old woman to stay. He replied that the law was the law. Then the man noticed calmly that the woman was cold as ice. He asked her how the children were. The woman hesitated. She was not at all pleased to hear such a question from her interlocutor. After that, he replied to the man that her children seemed to be fine. The woman stared long and intently into the coffee in her cup. She wanted to distract herself from her thoughts. At this time in the training room, girl Ji-hee continued to fight against the protagonist. Ji-hee looked at her Do-yoon carefully. She fought against him with a battle stick. The protagonist watched fearfully as the launched battle stick flew at him. After that, Ji-hee easily sagged down and prepared to attack her opponent further. The guy managed to dodge to the side in time to defend himself from the battle stick. Without wasting a moment, the Ji-hee girl accelerated and ran at full speed towards Do-yoon. The protagonist was scared. He realized he might not be able to defend himself against the girl's attack. Ji-hee was running towards the main character. The guy felt like he couldn't move. After that, the girl punched the guy in the face with her fist anyway. He only managed to squeeze his eyes shut. The guy felt that the blow did not reach the target. He very carefully and slowly opened his eyes. The protagonist noticed that the girl Ji-hee took her hand away from him. Ji-hee girl grabbed the battle stick with a very quick and dexterous movement. The guy was startled and jerked to the side. Ji-hee girl looked at the protagonist with a very cute and calm gaze. The Ji-hee girl waved her stick next to the protagonist at great speed. After that, the girl waving a stick cheerfully asked the guy, "Doesn't he do his exercises in the morning?" Do-yoon was a little scared. The girl shouted that the guy had poor stamina and a stiff body. In a fight, he would be killed right away. The protagonist was angry at such words. He decided to activate his powers. Do-yoon angrily called his rival a contagion and rushed to attack her. The girl was completely calm. The lad made attempts to attack his rival. She dodged with agility and at great speed. Once again, the protagonist swung to hit his rival and she ducked. After that, the Ji-hee girl suddenly appeared behind the protagonist and hit him with a stick. After a strong blow from the back from the girl, Do-yoon fell to the floor. Do-yoon lay exhausted on the floor. He could no longer get up. He had no strength. Ji-hee girl told the recumbent protagonist that he would have to get used to it and as soon as possible. The girl held a stick on her shoulder and sternly told the guy that they weren't fighting ordinary people. The protagonist lay exhausted on the floor. He didn't have the strength to object to the girl in any way. Suddenly, girl Ji-hee heard some noise from above. She raised her head. Ji-hee noticed Lin Yu's boyfriend standing by the window with his girlfriend Soo-hee. Ji-hee asked the girl excitedly if she had seen how the main character had just been beaten. Soo-hee said excitedly that Do-yoon is simply a rookie. Late at night, the protagonist was walking home after practice through the deserted streets. Do-yoon was exhausted from the past training session. He walked leisurely in the direction of the house. From behind the main character, a girl named Ji-hee was walking leisurely down the street. The annoyed guy stopped at the streetlight. He didn't like the girl following him. The guy asked the girl very angrily why she followed him. Ji-hee replied to the main character that they live in the same direction. After that, Ji-hee pounced on the guy from behind and said he called an innocent girl a stalker. Do-yoon replied that the girl has strength like a superhero. The protagonist shouted angrily at the girl to get off him. Suddenly, the girl saw an acquaintance named Soo-yoon nearby and started calling her loudly. The boy demanded that Ji-hee get off him. Ji-hee said her best friend Soo-yoon was standing nearby. She called out to her again. Soo-yoon stood near the crosswalk and didn't react. Ji-hee called out to her acquaintance once more. The protagonist, standing with his girlfriend, was slightly surprised and flustered. Do-yoon said cheerfully to the girl that he thought they were friends together with Soo-yoon. Ji-hee replied to the guy that there was something wrong with her girlfriend. The protagonist and his girlfriend waited for the green light. After that, Do-yoon and the girl quickly ran across the crosswalk to the opposite side of the street. Ji-hee's girlfriend really wondered where her friend had gone. The main character said that she might have been mistaken. After thinking for a while, the protagonist slyly said that maybe Ji-hee wasn't mistaken. The Ji-hee girl looked down carefully and said her girlfriend dropped something. The girl noticed a keychain lying on the sidewalk that could have belonged to her girlfriend. Ji-hee held the keychain in her hands and said excitedly that it belonged to Soo-yoon. After that, Ji-hee suggested that the guy go and return the keychain. Soo-yoon lived not far from here. Do-yoon thought there was something wrong. The protagonist thought about the missing girl Soo-yoon and realized it was all very suspicious. Ji-hee's girlfriend then walked up to the guy and grabbed his arm. With a cute expression on her face, she told the guy that he wouldn't let the little and innocent girl walk alone at night. The girl smiled as calmly and sweetly as possible at the protagonist. Do-yoon felt bad. He didn't want to go together with Ji-hee right now. After a short pause, The protagonist said that he agrees to go along with his girlfriend now, but he has a bad premonition. One day at school, Ji-hai found her friend Soo-yoon. Ji-hee shouted and called out to her acquaintance Soo-yoon standing beside her with great excitement. Soo-yoon was exhausted, lying asleep on her desk. Her friend shouted to her that she had to get up because it was time to eat. After a long pause, Soo-yoon barely lifted herself above the desk. She asked grudgingly, "Is it really time already?" Ji-hai decided to sit and chat with her friend Soo-yoon. Ji-hai asked a friend what's wrong with her lately. Soo-yoon sleeps all the time and is in the clouds in class. Soo-yoon told her friend exhaustedly that it was because she had signed up for another class. Ji-hee was very surprised. She asked her friend, did she sign up for another class? After that, Ji-hee asked excitedly to her girlfriend, "Is that one going to study to death?" A little excited, Ji-hai asked her friend Soo-yoon to let her copy her Korean history homework. Soo-yoon was surprised at her friend's request that she was asking her to cheat for the umpteenth time. Ji-hee said that she only needed one more time to cheat. Soo-yoon told her girlfriend that her homework is now in her bag. Ji-hee got very excited. Soo-yoon took out some notebooks from her bag. One of them really interested her friend. Ji-hai picked up a notebook that had a space theme. She was surprised and asked Soo-yoon, "Does this notebook belong to her?" The Soo-yoon girl was very unpleasantly surprised that girlfriend had taken her notebook. Ji-hee told her friend that she thought she only liked notebooks in pastel colors. Suddenly, Soo-yoon snatched the notebook from her girlfriend's hands very abruptly and said that it was all nonsense. Ji-hee looked at her friend in surprise. She said, "A notebook is still a notebook, no matter what it has on the cover." After that, Soo-yoon put her notebook under her desk. She asked her friend, "How is her schooling going?" Ji-hee smiled at her friend and said that she is the best in the center, no one can overtake her. Ji-hai told her friend to be careful or she'd hurt herself again. Ji-hai told her not to worry about her. The main character and his girlfriend Ji-hai came to the house where their girlfriend Soo-yoon lived in the evening. Ji-hee said excitedly that they had come. The protagonist thought to himself that the building was very big. The guests went to the intercom. They wanted to call the apartment where Soo-young lived. Suddenly, there was a very strong explosion in the building. The shockwave blew out the windows. Ji-hai's girlfriend got really scared because of the explosion. She realized that something might have happened to her girlfriend. The protagonist was scared too. He realized his worst suspicions had come true. Ji-hai's girlfriend was very scared because of the explosion. She decided to rush to her friend's aid. Ji-hee started banging on the front door of the house with all her might. She called her girlfriend's name. An agitated Ji-hee saw that no one was answering. She frightenedly demanded that Soo-yoon open the door. Suddenly, the door of the building opened and a very frightened woman ran out. The shocked woman fell to the ground. The guy and the girl were very surprised. Girl Ji-hee, a little coming to her senses, asked the woman what happened and what happened to Soo-yoon. The shocked woman repeated the Soo-yoon girl's name and said something about her room. Ji-hee was very much displeased. She wanted to tell the woman that she didn't understand what she was saying. The main character came over and pulled the girl aside. He wanted to talk to the woman himself. The guy walked up to the woman and touched her with his hand. He wanted to talk to her. After that, the protagonist looked into the woman's eyes with great attention. Do-yun noticed the woman's gaze swam a little. He activated his skills. An exhausted woman nearly collapsed. The protagonist was able to support her. A very surprised Ji-hee asked the guy, how on earth did the guy manage to find out? The main character told his girlfriend that there was an explosion in Soo-yoon's room. He was still holding the woman in his arms. The guy said it looked like someone came in. He didn't get a good look. Ji-hee's girlfriend told her boyfriend to stay outside and she would go look. Do-yoon replied to her girlfriend that it was all dangerous. Ji-hee tells the guy that he can't do much to help, so just let him sit outside. The main character saw a keychain belonging to Soo-yoon on her backpack. Do-yoon looked carefully at the keychain lying there. He decided to take it for himself. At this time, the girl went up into the building. There was smoke and soot all around. The girl went into the apartment where her girlfriend lived. There were blast marks all around. Ji-hai walked through the apartment, furniture crunching under her feet. Looking around, the girl grudgingly noted around her that the place was a complete mess. Ji-hee heard a suspicious rustling to the side. She thought she could only attack stealthily. The girl ran toward the stairs. She could hear the noise coming from somewhere above. The schoolgirl climbed the stairs very slowly and carefully. The upper floor showed signs of destruction. Ji-hee walked up slowly, treading her feet carefully on the steps. She was very cautious. The girl looked carefully at the floor. There was wall debris lying on the floor all around. Ji-hee walked very slowly across the floor. She thought she couldn't feel anyone, after which the girl peered carefully through the broken doorway. Ji-hai walked into the room. She saw her friend Soo-young sitting at the table as if nothing had happened. The girl went up to her friend and said cheerfully that she was very pleased that the latter was all right. The happy girlfriend suggested that Soo-yoon get out of the building as soon as possible because it was dangerous. The Soo-yoon girl sat at the table without any emotion and looked in front of her. After a short pause, Soo-yoon turned her head and looked at Ji-hee. Ji-hee's girlfriend got really scared. She realized that her girlfriend was not sitting in front of her. There was a big explosion at the top of the building. The main character was outside at the time. Do-yoon was very much frightened and agitated because of the repeated explosion. The guy was holding a keychain. He figured he didn't know how many enemies were in the building, but Ji-hee was certainly outnumbered. After the strongest blow, the girl Ji-hee flew back to the wall and stood there unconscious. Ji-hee stood with her back against the wall. A small crackling sound could be heard around her. The exhausted girl thought to herself that she had seen her girlfriend's doppelganger. The Soo-yoon girl stood and stared at her girlfriend with an unseeing gaze. Ji-hee looked closely and immediately realized that her friend was standing in front of her, but there was something wrong with her. At that time, the building began to shake very violently. The walls began to crack and windows and doors began to fall out. Ji-hee noticed that because of the shaking, something started falling on her and needed to be rescued. At the very last moment, Ji-hee managed to bounce to the side so she wouldn't get caught. Ji-hee angrily and excitedly told her girlfriend to calm down. At this time, the girl noticed broken glass sprinkled on the ground from above in front of her. Soo-yoon stood in the middle of the room. Rocks and shards were flying around her. After that, Ji-hee realized she had to defend herself. She decided to use the fallen door to do so. Ji-hee protected herself with the door as the shards flew at her. She realized that someone was controlling Soo-yoon's mind. Ji-hee thought to herself that she couldn't sense anyone else's presence. She was still holding the door in front of her. Then the girl felt someone approaching. Ji-hee turned her head to the side and saw the main character walking towards her. The guy was very surprised by everything that was going on. He froze in place and didn't say a word. The LDIE girl looked at the guy and shouted excitedly, "So why is he here?" At that time, Soo-yoon's girlfriend turned her head to the side. She saw the main character. There was a very strong and bright explosion at the place where the Soo-yoon girl was standing. The main character shouted loudly to his girlfriend Ji-hee to run away. Ji-hee realized that she couldn't waste time. She accelerated and started to run away. There was a deafening explosion in the room that blinded the protagonist. Do-yoon fearfully covered himself with his hands to avoid being caught in the explosion. After a brief pause, the protagonist opened his eyes and looked around. The protagonist saw Ji-hee's girlfriend being slammed against the wall with all the force of the blows. The frightened girl asked the boy, why did he come, since she told him not to go? The main character was very excited. He was scared after everything that happened. Do-yoon told the scared girl that he was simply worried. Ji-hee was surprised because the guy was worried about her. The girl was standing near a wall with cracks running down it. She held her up. The guy asked the girl what happened to her friend Soo-yoon. Ji-hee replied that she didn't know about her friend's fate. Ji-hee said that everything that was happening was unrelated to the Librium. She didn't sense anyone outside. If someone wanted to kill Soo-yoon, the girl would be dead by now. The guy excitedly asked what happened to the girl Soo-yoon. Ji-hee replied that she is trying to think for now. Ji-hee remembered that the Soo-yoon girl had psychometric abilities, but everything looked like she was using them unwillingly. Ji-hee was very excited. She was thinking about everything that was going on to the utmost. Suddenly, the girl was struck by a hunch. The guy asked, what did she think of? The girl reminded her friend that special conditions were needed to use psychometric abilities. Do-yoon remembered that a person could recognize another self in a portal. Suddenly, the protagonist got very excited and remembered to himself about the portal. The guy asked the girl, is it really all for the portal? Ji-hee replied that it is exactly like that. Ji-hee said that if a person has spent a lot of time near the portal, it's possible. Do-yoon asked the girl, where is the portal? Ji-hee told the guy that if she knew the location of the portal, there wouldn't be a problem. The girl was still standing against the wall. She was struggling to keep it from collapsing. The guy shouted to his girlfriend to think quickly. He reminded her that Soo-yoon and Ji were close friends. Ji, he asked excitedly, how could all this be related to the portal? It wasn't like she was spending 24 hours a day with Soo-yoon. After that, the girl yelled at the guy to stop yelling at her. Do-yoon sat on the floor. Suddenly, the boy was struck by a hunch. He thought about the girl's words about 24 hours a day. The main character started digging in his pockets. He wanted to find the keychain that Soo-young was carrying. The guy took out a keychain from his pocket. It was the one Soo-young girl had never parted with. The protagonist looked at the keychain carefully. Various visions appeared in front of him. In his visions, the protagonist saw a Soo-young girl sitting at a desk at school. Sometimes Soo-young would open her space notebook and look something up in it. The main character saw the girl Soo-young socializing with her classmates. The Soo-young girl was looking at something regularly and very carefully in her space notebook. It was the notebook that had something very important to do with Soo-yun. Schoolgirl Ji-hye abruptly and unexpectedly realized that it's all about the space notebook. After that, Ji-hee turned her head to the main character and shouted to him about the notebook. Do-yun saw to himself a black notebook with space stars in it. He was still holding Soo-yun's keychain. Ji-hee girl thought to herself after the words about space from the main character. The girl once again remembered holding the space notebook in her hands. There was a very loud cracking sound in the walls. They started to crack and fall apart. There are massive cracks all over the building. It's starting to collapse. Huge rocks started falling from the ceiling and onto the floor in various places. The main character and his girlfriend were lying on the floor. They heard someone's cautious footsteps. Ji-hye was lying under a pile of rocks, unable to get up. The protagonist was lying on the floor under the rocks. He barely heard someone walk up to him. There was a Soo-yun girl standing nearby. She stood attentively looking at the lying girlfriend and the protagonist. Ji-hee girl came to her senses a little. She shouted and called out her girlfriend by name. The protagonist wanted to get up, but he had no strength in his hands. He was still holding the keychain. At this time, the girl Soo-yun very clearly remembered that the notebook was lying on the table. Soo-yun then clearly saw her space notebook lying on the table. Soo-yun girl came close to her friend Ji-hee, who was still lying under the rubble. Ji-hye wanted to get out of the rubble, but she couldn't. Ji-hee girl looked over and saw that the main character was still holding the keychain in his hand. The girl shouted to the guy to hurry up and throw her the keychain. The protagonist did not understand right away. Do-yun asked her girlfriend what she wanted. Ji-hee yelled at the guy to drop the keychain. The protagonist tried to stick out a little and free himself from the rubble. Do-yun swung the keychain with all his might and launched it in the direction of the lying Ji-hye. The excited girl reached out her hand to grab the keychain at once. Ji-hye was able to pick up the keychain, flying at her with a precise movement. The main character got excited. He watched carefully to see what the girlfriend would do with the keychain. At this time, a huge red obstacle appeared near the Soo-yun girl's leg. Ji-hee was able to use her skills to enlarge the keychain to a huge size. After that, Ji-hee girl felt much more confident. She got to her feet. The Soo-yun girl turned to the side and looked at her girlfriend carefully. Soo-yun noticed that her friend Ji-hee was able to get out of the rubble safely. The main character was still lying on the floor. Soo-yun looked at her girlfriend standing not far from her with a large keychain. She realized it was dangerous. Ji-hee looked at her friend carefully. She prepared to attack her. After that, Ji-hee raised the keychain in front of him and prepared to use it to attack. The protagonist noticed the girl Ji-hee accelerated out of her seat and ran against her girlfriend. Do-yun heard the sound of a very strong punch after Ji-hee struck her opponent. The protagonist was very much startled and surprised. He was still lying under the rubble. Ji-hee girl stood holding a huge keychain in her hands. She glared menacingly at her defeated rival. The main character told Ji-hye that the unconscious girl Soo-yun was her friend. At that time, an old woman who had earlier been greeted by a Chi-soo woman was walking past the building in the night street. The old woman was walking slowly and in no hurry. She was thinking about something of her own. Suddenly, the old woman said to herself that she had not succeeded in what she wanted. The old woman was walking and rolling her bag with her. She did not understand how she would explain everything. After all that happened, the protagonist and his girlfriend came to the training center. They showed the burned notebook to a man. The man wasn't happy. He asked the guy and the girl, did they burn everything to the ground? The main character was silent. Ji-hee's girlfriend confirmed that they burned everything and apologized. The man sitting at the table grudgingly said that they wouldn't find any clues in the ashes. Ji-hee girl wanted to get excited about the fate of her girlfriend Soo-yun. The man said the girl was taken to the hospital. She'll be treated there. She only has bruises. Ji-hee's girlfriend got really excited because her girlfriend was doing well. The man turned around and told the school children to go and rest. The guy and the girl left and slammed the door. The man was thinking about something of his own. Then the man abruptly picked up a pen and started writing something on a piece of paper. The man was thinking about something unhappily to himself. He was brooding and cursing. After a brief pause, the pen froze in the man's hands. He called someone an old mutt. The protagonist and his girlfriend walked together in silence through the corridors of the center. Do-yun was walking along with his girlfriend. They were silent. Neither of them wanted to be the first to start a conversation. Suddenly, the guy and the girl both turned to each other at the same time. The protagonist looked at his girlfriend in surprise and said she could speak first. Ji-hee told the guy a little shyly that she was the reason he was in a jam. The girl modestly apologized to the schoolboy. The guy looked at her and remained silent. After a brief pause, the protagonist told his girlfriend not to worry as it wasn't her fault. Ji-hee asked the schoolboy, what did he want to ask her? The protagonist reminded his girlfriend that she had said earlier that being near a portal for a long time affects a person. Do-yun said that everyone who was near the portal could get symptoms like Soo-yun's. He added that something else could happen. The intrigued Ji-hee asked the guy what else could happen. Do-yun stood there and remained silent. The protagonist asked slowly, "Can someone gain abilities without seeing themselves from another world?" Ji-hee girl thought deeply about the words she heard from the main character. After a short pause, the girl replied that she had never heard of such a thing. The guy suspiciously told his girlfriend that she looked like she'd heard. Ji-hee confirmed that she didn't know anything about anything. The schoolgirl said in an important voice that the portal was a very dangerous place. Soo-yun had been around it for a very long time. The girl told the guy that he had no idea of the consequences that could arise when it came to the other world. The guy asked the girlfriend if that's why she burned everything down. The girl confirmed the guy's words. The protagonist thought. He analyzed and rethought the words from the girl for a long time. Do-yun asked excitedly to the girl, "Was the Soo-yun girl's notebook a portal?" The guy asked his girlfriend, "Is it really possible to enter the parallel world of Librium through any portal?" Ji-hee explained that some portals allow access to other measures, and some don't. The portal could more accurately be called a link between the two worlds. The protagonist replied, surprised that this is the first time he's heard this. Ji-hee shouted that it's all dangerous. The schoolgirl said they have no idea what's hiding in the Librium. From there, other creatures could come through and become a threat to Earthlings. The girl told the guy that she had to stop by and they could see each other later. Do-yun said goodbye to the girlfriend. The protagonist thought about the portal between worlds for a long time. It was late at night when the protagonist returned to his apartment. As soon as the protagonist entered the apartment, he was greeted by a Kali woman. She asked the guy why did he come so late. Do-yun told the woman that if she was curious, then why didn't she run away like last time? Kaylee looked at the protagonist and said it was dark outside and she could get lost. The woman questioned the schoolboy about why he was late and why he had abrasions on his arms. The protagonist put his hands behind his back and told the woman he had something to tell her. The woman told the guy he was clumsy and to get in the shower and go to bed. The main character approached the woman and said he wanted to ask her something. Kali asked the guy what he wanted to know. The protagonist asked the woman, what did she see in the portal? Was it her double? The guy asked the woman if she killed her doppelganger. Kaylee didn't say anything. The woman asked the guy why so many questions. Do-yun demanded that the woman answer quickly. Kaylee told the guy that she killed her doppelganger with her own hands. The woman looked like her, only older. The woman suspiciously asked the guy if there was a problem with that. Afterward, the protagonist came to the meeting. He sadly told his interlocutor that he had not seen. The interlocutor looked attentively and perplexedly at the schoolboy who had passed to him. The protagonist once again very sadly repeated to his interlocutor that he had seen no one, at which time the old woman walked through the night city and came to the right building. Then the old woman went up to the right floor and went behind the door where she was already expected. An elderly woman threw off her Panama and said she was not up to the task. After that, the old woman flopped down on the couch. There was a long silence in the room. A man standing near the window told the older woman that she'd done her best anyway. The man picked up the glass of drink and said thoughtfully, Han Ki-jun is an interesting personality. The man looked at the picture of the girl standing next to him and said that it would be good if Han Ki-jun understood his warnings.